After a short silence, the camp owner looked at Su Ching and said, "Kid, let's let this matter drop. You saved Sergeant Thunder and his nemesis is dead. There's no reason for you and I to fight to the death. Besides, I'm an elder in the Golden Vajra warrior sect. If you keep fighting with me, you're basically declaring war on my sect. Our patriarch is a Foundation establishment expert." Su Ching stood there quietly before coughing up a mouthful of blood. Staggering a bit, he reached up as if to wipe away the blood. However, that was when the camp owner, who had seemed like he was ready to stop fighting, suddenly rushed forward, eyes flashing coldly. He moved even faster than before, the golden light around him erupting with greater intensity than ever as his body seemed to transform into gold. Golden Vajra Warrior, Third Dharma. From a distance, golden light seemed to cover the camp owner, and his killing intent burned with unmatchable intensity. Su Ching's expression didn't change at all. What was more, the stagger from before instantly disappeared. It was clearly an act, and he hadn't been raising his hand to wipe the blood from his mouth, but rather to lift it over his head. He closed his eyes. In his mind, he recalled the image in that temple in which the walking, godlike statue lifted its hand to unleash a saber strike that contained some sort of great Tao. Su Ching had practiced that saber strike countless times, but had never used it in combat. Right now, he had the feeling that he could use it. Violet light spilled out, covering him and circling up to his right hand. The statue of the god was gold, but Su Ching was different. As the violet light surged, the camp owner howled and closed in. Then Su Ching's right hand dropped in a seemingly casual movement. There was nothing spectacular about it, and in fact, it seemed completely ordinary, even simple. Yet within that ordinary movement was something profound. Because of that profundity, as the violet light converged on his hand, and as the hand dropped past his head, the image of a saber appeared in. It was a huge, heavenly saber. Violet light glittered, replacing the sunlight, superseding the golden light, taking over everything. As Su Ching's hand fell, that saber fell and sliced through everything in its path. A sound like a thunderclap echoed out, and the ground in the camp shook. A rushing wind swept through the camp, accompanied by blinding light. The scavengers backed away, without even thinking about it. As for the camp owner, he had been speeding towards Su Ching, but now he slowed down until he came to a complete stop about 3 meters from Su Ching. First he looked at Su Ching, then he looked down at the ground. Beneath him there was a perfectly straight fissure. It was over 20 meters long, and it stretched much further past where he stood. "That saber," he murmured. Blood appeared on his face, stretching from his forehead down to his chin. Then it went to his chest and toward his Danshan region. Blood sprayed out as he split completely in two. After the two sides flopped to the ground, silence prevailed. The only sounds to be heard were the faint gasps from the incredulous onlookers. The setting sun shone on the young man who stood there, blood dripping off the tips of his fingers and landing below, causing ripples to spread out in the pools of blood that filled the street. His reflection was hard to see in the blood, but even still, the coldness of his eyes was visible. Su Ching quietly put away his bloody dagger and skewer. He picked up the talisman treasure with its faint calligraphy, then turned and walked toward Crucifix and Graceful Raptor, who likewise had expressions of awe on their faces. Su Ching took the unconscious Sergeant Thunder into his arms and carried him away. Heads bowed, Crucifix and Graceful Raptor followed. Su Ching's shadow stretched long in the evening sun. It seemed unspeakably melancholy as it moved across the blood-soaked ground. The scavengers watched him leave, then turned their attention to the corpses, which were like bloodstains left behind as Su Ching walked away. Some of the people present thought back to when Su Ching had fought the giant horned anaconda in the beast trial, and how he had also left behind a streak of blood as he dragged it out of the arena. Those two images seemed to combine into one. "Kid," someone yelled, and then the other scavengers started to say the same thing. "Kid, kid." Their voices joined, growing louder. Old people, young people, adults, even the girls in the feather tents. All of them looked at him with fervent admiration as they called his nickname louder and louder. It was a special salute from the scavengers. \\\\asterisk. The sun had almost set. At the main gate to the base camp, Su Ching stopped to shift Sergeant Thunder onto his back and then looked over his shoulder at Crucifix and Graceful Raptor. They looked back at him with respect and other complicated feelings. They had an idea what was going to happen next. "You're leaving?" Crucifix asked quietly. Su Ching nodded. "I'm going to take Sergeant Thunder on the final leg of his journey, then I'll leave this place." Neither Crucifix nor Graceful Raptor said anything. It was really only at this point that Su Qing realized he had to say goodbye. He gave them a deep look, and then glanced at the camp where he had spent almost half a year of his life. Graceful Raptor took a step forward and straightened his hair. Ignoring the blood soaking him, she gave him a hug. "Take care of yourself." Su Qing didn't push her away. "What about you two?" he asked softly. "We're going away, don't worry. Crucifix and I can take care of ourselves. We're strong enough that we can do well at whatever base camp we end up in," she smiled. Crucifix didn't say anything. He just stepped forward and gave Su Qing a firm hug. With that, Su Qing walked a few steps, turned and waved, then left the camp and walked toward the forbidden region. Crucifix and Graceful Raptor stood there watching him get farther and farther away. When he finally disappeared from sight, Graceful Raptor said, "What do you think, Crucifix? Will we ever see him again? We never even asked his real name." "We'll see him again, and as for names, they aren't important." Reaching out, he took Graceful Raptor's hand. // Su Qing carried Sergeant Thunder on his back, just like he had when the old man was injured and he took him out of the forbidden region. In fact, he followed the same path back. Unfortunately, Sergeant Thunder grew less and less heavy, as though the life force in him were draining away. And slowly but surely, an aura of death built up in him. Su Qing's sorrow grew stronger. He entered the jungle, going deeper and deeper in one specific direction. Eventually, the sun set and night took hold. Because of the energy and lingering killing intent on him, no mutant beast blocked his path. They simply let him pass in his grief. About 2 hours later, a raspy voice spoke from behind him. "Kid, I had a dream." Sergeant Thunder was awake, and he had an absent-minded look on his face. He didn't ask Su Qing where they were or how they got there. He didn't ask what happened to him. "I dreamed of Taohong and you." Su Qing's eyes were bloodshot and his heart heavy with sorrow. He started walking faster but did everything possible to keep his gait steady. They were almost there. "In the dream, you were just as clever as you are now. You were always first place in class." It sounded like Sergeant Thunder wanted to laugh, but speaking took too much energy. His voice was getting weaker. "It was a really good dream. I can't hold on much longer, kid." Su Qing raced forward as fast as he could. He tried to somehow use the powers of his violet crystal to heal Sergeant Thunder, but it didn't do any good. The old man's life force just kept slipping away. Another hour later, they reached the spot where they'd encountered the singing. Su Qing put Sergeant Thunder down beneath the same big tree as before. His eyes were red, and his nose stung as he looked down at the old man's wrinkled face. "Sarge," he said softly. As the old man leaned against the tree, his eyes flickered open. They were cloudy and somewhat blank, but a moment later he realized where he was, and he smiled. There was still some life left in his eyes. "Got any liquor, kid?" Su Qing nodded and took a jug of alcohol out of his sack. Opening it, he put it to Sergeant Thunder's lips and helped him take a drink. The sergeant's eyes shone a bit brighter after he swallowed. It was like the glow of a candle right before it went dark. Sergeant Thunder looked up at Su Qing's red eyes and he chuckled. "You don't need to cry." The sergeant seemed to regain a bit of strength, and with Su Qing's help pushed himself up against the tree into a standing position. Then he tried to reach out and tousle Su Qing's hair but couldn't manage it, and his hand fell back. Su Qing reached out, grabbed his hand and put it on his head. The old man smiled. "You know, I'm actually lucky to have someone with me at a time like this, and I have some alcohol too. Even better, once I die, there's someone here to bury me. A lot of people in this world die sad and alone, out in the middle of nowhere, their corpse rotting away in the sun. You know, death isn't something to be afraid of. What's really scary is being alone in the moments before you die." The light in Sergeant Thunder's eyes was starting to fade. "Kid, help me take one last drink." Grief filled Su Qing's heart as he carefully put the jug of alcohol up to Sergeant Thunder's lips. The alcohol spilled out but didn't enter his mouth. The sergeant looked over Su Qing's shoulders, his gaze vacant as he murmured, "Are you coming for me, Taohong?" The alcohol seeped down the sergeant's garment onto the ground below. He didn't drink. The light in his eyes went out as his life force dissipated. Su Qing trembled, bowing his head as he lost control of his sorrow. It swept over him from head to toe. He gripped the jug of alcohol so hard his fingers bit into the clay surface, but he didn't notice. A long moment later, he bit his lip, put the jug off to the side and looked at the old man in front of him. The old man who would never wake up again. In his mind, he could see that time in the city ruins when Sergeant Thunder had looked over his shoulder and suddenly said, "Kid, do you want to come with me?" Tears seeped out of Su Qing's eyes, creating rivulets as they cut through the blood on his face and fell onto his garments. Back in the slums, he had never cried, but right now he couldn't control himself. He stood there with Sergeant Thunder until the sun rose. Then he buried the old man beneath the tree, along with the jug of alcohol. Scavengers didn't need gravestones, as no one would visit them to mourn. But Sergeant Thunder had a gravestone. Su Qing stood in front of it, staring blankly. Time passed. Eventually, he reached into his sack and pulled out a small item wrapped in hemp cloth. It was a piece of candy. Putting the candy in his mouth, he leaned against the tree and closed his eyes. The candy was sweet. Someone had once told him that, when he felt bad, he should eat this candy, and it would make him feel better. Eventually, the candy melted in his mouth. Sunlight streamed down through the treetops, lingering on his face for a time until it, too, melted down into his soul, as if to assuage his grief. Eventually, Su Qing opened his eyes and looked up at the sun in the sky. Then he looked down at Sergeant Thunder's gravestone. He sighed. "Sarge, have a safe journey." Clasping hands, he bowed deeply, then turned and walked away. As he did, he took all his feelings of weakness and buried them in his heart. As for his youthfulness and immaturity, they were buried in the ground with Sergeant Thunder, never to be seen again. Fate had given Su Qing a bit of warmth, but then the world cruelly stole it away. That was just life. He had no choice but to continue walking the path in front of him. Gradually, his gaze again became as sharp as a blade, but at the same time, there was something deeper in his eyes. Moving quickly, he headed toward the edge of the jungle. As he slipped through the mottled sunlight, there was still a bleakness in him that the brightness couldn't dispel. As it built, it turned into loneliness. Deeper and deeper. Colder and colder. He was like a wolf pup that had grown up alone in a brutal jungle, and was getting closer and closer to being a true lone wolf. Day went by during which he didn't rest at all. Eventually, he was out of the forbidden region. The area he stepped out into wasn't connected to the base camp. He had no plans to go back there. There would definitely be consequences for killing Sergeant Thunder's nemesis. That man had worked for an organization that operated throughout the continent of South Phoenix. Even though he wasn't a very important person, they would surely investigate his death. Su Qing wasn't going to gamble on it either way. But most important was that he'd killed the camp owner. Su Qing had heard Sergeant Thunder talk about the Golden Vajra warrior sect. Night Dove was powerful, but could only be considered an outside force, while the Golden Vajra warrior sect was the strongest force in the region. They had connections to dozens of cities and scavenger base camps, and directly ran many of them. What was more, the sect's patriarch was a Foundation establishment expert. To the people who lived around here, including the scavengers, Foundation establishment experts were like immortals. Although few had ever seen one, the awe and might they commanded was enough to strike reverence into the hearts of all. Because of that, Su Qing knew that since he had killed two of their elders, the sect was going to be enraged at him specifically. There was one simple way to deal with the problem. He needed to join an organization that could strike fear into the hearts of the Golden Vajra warrior sect and ensure that they wouldn't do anything to him. That organization was none other than Seven Blood Eyes. To the local cities and base camps, the Golden Vajra warrior sect was a colossal monster of a group. But to the Golden Vajra warrior sect, the same could be said about Seven Blood Eyes. Even if the Golden Vajra warrior sect was 100 times more courageous, it wouldn't dare to provoke Seven Blood Eyes. The best way to resolve this crisis, at least for the moment, was for him to become a disciple of Seven Blood Eyes. Therefore, as soon as he was out of the forbidden region, he patted the Seven Blood Eyes identity medallion in his sack, and then looked around with shining eyes. He was going to take a trip to Seven Blood Eyes. It was located so far away that an ordinary person would waste years of their life walking there. Not only would they have to cross entire mountain ranges, but also they would face numerous dangers. But the identity medallion was going to make things a lot easier. On the back was a map which showed cities controlled by Seven Blood Eyes. All he had to do was take his medallion there, and he would get a one-time free teleportation to the sect headquarters. Right now, the nearest city to Su Qing was Antlerville, which was in the opposite direction as Laughing Pines. Unlike Laughing Pines, you couldn't just buy a residence permit to live in Antlerville. Instead, you needed a recommendation letter from a Seven Blood Eyes disciple. That was why Sergeant Thunder hadn't been able to settle down there. When that thought crossed his mind, Su Qing turned to look back at the forbidden region. Then, as the evening stretched out, he headed toward Antlerville. It should only take me about 3 days to get there. He had never been to Antlerville, but he was familiar with the name. as it wasn't very far from the city where he had once lived for 6 years. 2 days passed by. *********. Su Qing's decision to avoid the base camp had been the right one. There were now dozens of Golden Vajra warrior sect disciples there keeping an eye on things, and there were 7 or 8 who were in the jungle searching for clues. The reason for this was that there were all sorts of people among the scavengers, all with their own goals and ideas. The only way to keep events in the camp a secret would have been to wipe them all out. But news traveled fast, and when the Golden Vajra warrior sect heard what happened, they were furious. To them, losing 2 elders was a big matter, especially in terms of face. In essence, it was a provocation, and therefore they had to resolve the issue as quickly as possible to maintain their prestige. Even after 2 days of waiting, though, Su Qing never showed up. Of course, the Forbidden Region was huge, and they had no idea if he actually went inside, and the Golden Vajra warrior sect didn't have enough people to thoroughly search the wilderness. It was impossible to stop the spread of rumors, and soon, all of the cities and camps in the area knew about what happened. The fact that the Golden Vajra warrior sect's search for the culprit wasn't going anywhere made every member of the sect even angrier. At the moment, an angry roar could be heard coming from the middle of the Golden Vajra warrior sect. The sect headquarters wasn't very far from Laughing Pines. It was a very expensive and beautiful complex of buildings built on a mountain, filled with hundreds of disciples and quite a few top experts. As for the angry roar, it came from the grand hall on the very top of the mountain. "You haven't found him." Sitting on a throne at the end of the hall was a middle-aged man dressed in a golden robe. He was imposing, and his eyes flashed with anger. Given his rage, it was no surprise his spirit power fluctuations weighed down heavily on the others present. Currently, there were 2 people standing in front of him. Both were middle-aged and wore the same type of golden robe. Their spirit power fluctuations were intense, surpassing that of the camp owner, and they were both frowning. "Sect leader," one of them said, "the wilderness is too big. Why not have the camp guards and scavengers organize a search? If we do that, it shouldn't take more than 3 days to find the culprit." "What are you, a comedian?" the sect leader shouted. "Some boy kills 2 of our elders, drenches our base camp in blood, and you want to ask help from the guards and scavengers. The Golden Vajra warrior sect would lose all face." The other 2 men held their tongues and said nothing further. A moment later, the sect leader took a deep breath and, eyes glittering with killing intent, pointed at his 2 subordinates. "Grand Elder Li, Grand Elder Chen, you're both at the peak of the 9th level of qi condensation. Either of you could kill this kid without expending any effort. I already sent a message to the Patriarch asking for instructions. I requested 2 of his search talismans for you, so once we get formal permission, you will go out and do whatever you have to do to resolve the issue. I want the kid's head brought back to me in 24 hours or less." The 2 Grand Elders accepted the orders, with very serious looks on their faces. Meanwhile, the sect leader's eyes shone with cold light as he gave them each a jade slip. Then, just as they were about to go ask permission from the Patriarch, the sound of a cold harumph echoed out in the hall like thunder. The sound was so powerful it caused the 2 elders' minds to reel. Even the sect leader reacted visibly. Then he stood and walked away from the throne as, at the other end of the hall, an old man appeared, wearing a gold robe with a primarily red color scheme. The old man was tall and burly, and his face was ruddy. His long white hair was disheveled, and his eyes crackled as if with lightning. As he entered, spirit power fluctuations rolled out that completely surpassed the qi condensation level. Wherever he walked, the ground split and cracked beneath him. Furthermore, his aura was so impressive that it created something like a tempest around him. In fact, if one looked closely, they would see that his feet weren't even touching the ground. He was actually walking on thin air. This was not some trick using a wind cultivation technique. He was really walking on air. Behind him, it was possible to see the illusory image of an angry Vajra warrior, pulsing with so much power that, if it attacked, the entire surrounding hall would be destroyed. As soon as this man arrived, the 3 people in the hall dropped to their knees and kowtowed. "Our respects, Patriarch." Patriarch Golden Vajra warrior said nothing, but instead strode to the throne and sat down. Then he looked coldly at his 3 subordinates for a moment before his lightning-like gaze came to rest on the sect leader. "Yunwen, did you forget the sect mandate of our Golden Vajra warrior sect?" Sweat broke out on the sect leader's forehead as he immediately replied. "Patriarch, sir, I haven't forgotten. The Golden Vajra warrior sect's mandate states that we try not to take action unless necessary. But when we do take action, we use the sharp energy of the Golden to strike like a Vajra warrior. That's why I already arranged for these two grand elders to go out and handle the matter." "You numbskull," the patriarch raged. "I just looked into the kid's background. He rose to prominence out of nowhere recently. As a new member of Squad Thunderbolt, he slaughtered a whole host of enemies on his first run into the Forbidden Region there. Despite being weaker than Squad Bloodshadow, he wiped them out, and he saved a lot of scavengers. He's proficient in the Tao of Poison, and even though he's only in the 6th level of Qi Condensation, he slaughtered 2 of our elders and numerous disciples. Then he got away completely unscathed. Now, you can't even find him. Despite how many people live in that scavenger camp, there have been only 2 people willing to give information about him. Obviously, people like him. Based on accounts I've read in the ancient records throughout the years, when dealing with a person like this, you either work things out with them, or you go all out to kill them. And now you're planning to send out only 2 people to get him, a person who's proficient at winning from a position of weakness. You might as well be sending them to their deaths." By the time he finished speaking, Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior seemed completely infuriated. The 3 subordinates couldn't do anything but tremble and bow their heads. Snorting coldly, the Patriarch continued, "I can tell that if you 2 go out and run into him, he'll end up killing you both." Looking at the sect leader, he said, "Then you get pissed off and go chasing after him, and he'd kill you too. Finally, I would show up, but by that time he'd be long gone. Then, years later, he'd come back and slap me to death with a single." The sect leader was stunned to hear this analysis and was sweating now more than before. Of course, he didn't actually think that events would play out like that, but he also didn't dare to argue with the Patriarch. Keeping his head bowed, he simply said, "What should we do, Patriarch?" Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior looked out at the wilderness for a long moment. Then he said, "Send the disciples out to search the area. Have everyone in the cities and scavenger base camps keep an eye out as well. I'll give these 2 elders flight talismans in addition to the search talismans. They can each cover 1/2 of our territory. I'll join the search too. If anyone finds him, they're to notify me first. That is the way we can strike like a Vajra warrior. It is also the only surefire way to ensure our sect's prestige is not damaged." Shortly thereafter, bells rang in the Golden Vajra Warrior sect. Disciples poured out of the main gates, while at the same time, the Patriarch took the Grand Elders up into the sky. In front of him were 3 glittering paper talismans that indicated a direction to follow. The 3 symbols turned into 3 beams of light that shot in different directions. From that point, the Patriarch and the Grand Elders split up. Su Qing sped through the wilderness for 2 days. An ordinary person who tried to keep going for that long would quickly fall into exhaustion. But with Su Qing's powers of recovery, that wasn't something he had to worry about. In fact, he felt limber and warmed up. It didn't take long for him to notice that there were people looking for him. They wore the same robes that the camp owner and other Golden Vajra Warrior sect cultivators had worn. By exercising care, he was able to avoid them. About a day out from Antlerville, he reached a fork in the road. If he went left, he would reach the city he'd lived in for 6 years. Of course, it was now a forbidden region, covered with darkness that was visible even from a great distance. If he picked the road leading to the right, he would be heading to Antlerville. Standing there, Su Qing looked in the direction of the forbidden region for a few breaths of time. Then he turned to head toward Antlerville. However, before he could start moving, his expression flickered and he ducked into a thicket on the side of the road. Eyes narrowed, he looked up into the sky. Up above, a golden streak of light screamed past. From this distance, all he could see was the bright golden light. He wasn't able to make out the figure within it, but the spirit power fluctuations were more intense than the camp owner. Su Qing was shocked. This pressure surpasses the camp owner's. Then the beam of light disappeared into the distance, and Su Qing took a deep breath. However, his eyes flickered with hesitation. During the past 2 days, he had encountered 3 groups of cultivators from the Golden Vajra Warrior sect. He had avoided all of them, and yet none had seemed particularly threatening to him. If I keep going this way, I'll reach Antlerville. On the one hand, no one knew he had that identity medallion, so no one would be able to use that information to guess that he wanted to get to Antlerville. But he had another advantage. Given that he didn't have to worry about the mutagen in forbidden regions, he could stay in a forbidden region for long periods of time without any problem. Heading to Antlerville would have its advantages as long as he moved quickly enough that the Golden Vajra Warrior sect didn't realize what was going on. If he could reach it in time, he could teleport away before they knew what was happening. But the downside was that if they spotted him on the road, they would realize where he was going, and then he would be in big trouble. The advantage of going to the Forbidden Region was that he could buy time. Once the Golden Vajra warrior sect got tired, then he would have an additional advantage and would have a much better chance of reaching Antlerville safely. In the meantime, if he ran into danger, he would always be able to retreat further into the Forbidden Region. Two options to pick from. As he weighed the pros and cons, the golden beam of light suddenly appeared again up in the sky, moving at incredible speed. Seeing that, Su Qing frowned. Remaining unmoving in his hiding spot, he watched the light as it flew closer and closer. Eventually, he was able to spot a middle-aged cultivator in the light. He had a paper talisman on his right leg, which emanated spirit power fluctuations that apparently allowed the man to fly. In front of him was another paper talisman, which was the source of the golden light. Within that constantly flickering light, it was possible to make out a shadowy form. As Su Qing looked, he suddenly realized that it was one of the camp guards he had killed outside the camp owner's mansion. It seemed they were using his soul as a sort of hunting dog to sniff out prey. The middle-aged cultivator slowed down, looking around the area before shifting directions and continuing his search. Su Qing's heart was pounding. A talisman treasure. Although he wasn't exactly sure what that paper talisman did, he could guess. They're using someone I killed to sense me and identify my position. Thankfully, the range doesn't seem to be very large. Su Qing suddenly felt a profound sense of understanding regarding the spectacular things that magical techniques could do. After spending a short time further considering the pros and cons, he made his decision. I can't keep going to Antlerville. It'll take an entire day, and my chances of being discovered during that time are too great. And if they do find me, I won't have anywhere to hide. Turning, he sped in the direction of the Forbidden Region. His current plan was to hide out there for a short time while deciding what to do next. He had only been moving for the time it takes an incense stick to burn when the golden light appeared in the sky again, this time behind him. He quickly found a hiding spot, then looked back. The golden light seemed to be locked onto his position and was accelerating. Even worse, there was a stream of sword light that sped out in front at even greater speed. Su Qing's expression flickered slightly, and he burst out of hiding and started moving at top speed. The moment he started moving, rumbling echoed out, and the sword light slammed into the spot where he'd been hiding, sending soil exploding out in all directions. Meanwhile, the golden light continued to approach. Then he heard a cold snort. "You little whoreson, I finally found you, so this is where you were hiding." The golden light got closer and closer, and within it, the middle-aged man became more clearly visible. He had a square jaw and wore a long golden robe. He looked average in both height and facial features, but had prominent eyebrows. Beneath those eyebrows, his eyes glittered with sinister killing intent as he looked in Su Qing's direction. Just as he did, Su Qing suddenly stamped his right foot down and jumped straight up into the air toward the man. The cultivator sneered. The first time he'd passed by earlier, the search talisman had reacted strangely, and thus he'd returned for a closer look. Now, just as he had a lock on his target, Su Qing jumped up toward him. Just as Su Qing reached the maximum height his momentum would allow, and right before he started falling back down, the middle-aged cultivator extended his right hand. A tempest appeared around him, and he waved his finger. Instantly, the tempest fell, surrounding Su Qing with whipping winds. A boom could be heard as he slammed into the ground. Then he started racing toward the Forbidden Region. The cultivator made to chase, but then a glittering light shot from Su Qing, resolving to a dagger. The cultivator's eyes narrowed as he twisted out of the way to avoid it. "Useless," he yelled. Su Qing looked up but didn't say anything in response. He just pushed forward with greater speed. He could already tell that he wasn't a match for this person. Maybe if the man couldn't fly, then he could rely on his powers of regeneration to keep him going through serious injury and eventually kill him. But as long as the enemy could fly, Su Qing couldn't do much. When one person was in the air and the other was stuck on the ground, the latter was at a huge disadvantage. As Su Qing pushed forward with all the speed he could muster, the golden-robed cultivator pulled out the transmission slip he had to contact his patriarch. At the same time, he sped after Su Qing, performing incantation gestures to unleash beams of magical light. As a grand elder in the 9th level of Qi condensation, he had abundant spirit power and plenty of magical techniques to use. From a distance, it was possible to see numerous wind blades and fireballs smashing into the ground. Even when Su Qing managed to dodge the attacks, he would still get hit with shockwaves and debris. Already, blood was oozing out of the corners of his mouth. Laughing coldly, the cultivator said, "The patriarch is too cautious. I don't need his help. I can kill you all by myself." Despite his bravado, and even though Su Qing already looked bedraggled, the Grand Elder didn't land on the ground. He stayed in the air, performing a double-handed incantation gesture that sent a windstorm down toward the ground. Killing intent glittered in Su Qing's eyes. Being hammered at in such a passive position made his desire to kill even stronger. However, he also knew that though he was only dealing with one person at the moment, the enemy could surely contact his sect for backup. So Su Qing kept speeding toward the Forbidden Region. If more people from the Golden Vajra warrior sect showed up, especially the patriarch the man had just mentioned, Su Qing knew he would be in great danger. Because the man stayed high in the air, Su Qing couldn't counterattack, nor did he have any way to lure the man down. This guy is too cautious, I can't keep waiting. A violet glow flickered in Su Qing's eyes as the tempest descended. When the winds hit him, a violet-colored saber suddenly appeared above his head. Su Qing coughed up blood as the winds injured him, but at the same time, he dropped his arm. The heavenly saber appeared once again, slashing downward. The cultivator in midair suddenly felt an intense sensation of deadly crisis, and his face fell. Backing up, he tapped into all the power of the flight talisman to gain altitude. Just as he did, a shocking rumble echoed out as the image of a saber slashed through the air right below him. If he had reacted just a bit too slowly, or if he had been flying lower, then he knew he would have been slashed by that attack. He had evaded death, yet didn't get out unscathed. His left foot was hit, slicing a huge bloody wound into it. Intense pain pulsed through him, causing his killing intent to skyrocket. At the same time, his vigilance grew. There was no doubt that without his flight talisman, that shocking saber would have hit him straight on, and even if it didn't kill him, it would definitely have seriously injured him. The patriarch was right, the kid fights dirty. Down on the ground, Su Qing wiped the blood from his mouth and stared up coldly at his enemy and his injured left foot. He wished he had done something slightly different that resulted in the man being dead, but there wasn't time to think about that now. Turning, he sped toward the Forbidden Region. Gritting his teeth against the pain, the Grand Elder bandaged his wound and looked at Su Qing, his killing intent raging. Then he hesitated for a brief moment before deciding not to give chase. Instead, he flew higher to gain altitude, then unleashed some magical attacks to try to interfere with Su Qing's progress. He wasn't going to take action personally at this point. His life was a lot more important to him than accomplishing a task for the sect, and if Su Qing was dead set on entering the Forbidden Region, he wasn't going to stop him. Once the patriarch shows up, the boy is dead. Because he wasn't willing to get too close, his magical techniques didn't cause much problem for Su Qing. What was more, Su Qing was already recovering. As he moved, he picked up speed. Before long, he dashed into the Forbidden Region. Outside, the cultivator hovered in midair trying to decide if he should follow inside. Before he could, something like the crackle of thunder reached his ear from behind, and he looked over his shoulder to see two people approaching. In the front was a man with red on his robe and white hair whipping around him, making him seem threatening without being angry. In the air behind him was the spectral image of a golden Vajra warrior, surrounding the man with whipping winds. This was none other than Patriarch Golden Vajra. Behind him was the other Grand Elder. Reinforcements had arrived. Su Qing, who had just stepped into the Forbidden Region, looked back and saw what was happening. His pupils constricted as an intense sensation of deadly crisis filled him. He even started trembling physically. Of course, it was all because of the tall, burly old man in the red robe. Foundation establishment. That was the main thing Su Qing was thinking about. The immense pressure he felt caused him to tremble even a great distance away. It was truly stupefying. This man's identity was self-evident. He was the patriarch of the Golden Vajra warrior sect. The image of the Golden Vajra warrior behind him was especially noteworthy. It was like a heavenly warrior that caused Su Qing's eyes to sting when merely looking at it. It reminded him of his days in the slums when he caught sight of chi condensation cultivators from a distance. However, the sensation vastly surpassed that. What was more, when looking at the patriarch, he felt like the man had somehow locked onto his position. Even after closing his eyes, an image of the man seemed burned into his mind. Worse, that image brought pain with it, causing Su Qing to feel like his head was aching. In some ways, this correlated to a mental attack. That said, because of Su Qing's experience struggling with control over his shadow, he was familiar with such sensations. Furthermore, after practicing the saber strike from the godlike statue, he had grown mentally resilient, so the pain wasn't too much to deal with. Looking away from the patriarch, he started picking up speed. As he ran through the Forbidden Region, He pulled a handful of his black boluses out and threw them behind him. When they hit the ground, they exploded. Once the outer surface formed from seven-leaf clover sap vanished, the interior of black medicinal powder spread out, then turned into vortexes that attracted the surrounding mutagen. Because he'd thrown about a dozen pills, it looked like a huge tide of mutagen rushing from all directions to the convergence point. The Grand Elder, who'd been about to rush into the forbidden region, suddenly stopped and frowned. Not sure what was happening, he didn't dare proceed. Though the black boluses were the result of Su Qing's failed experiment to create white boluses, he was loath to waste them. However, in the heat of this moment, it seemed the perfect thing to do. As Su Qing fled, the mutagen behind him turned into an astonishing storm. Rumbling sounds filled the area until the distant beams of light grew near. Upon reaching the edge of the forbidden region, Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior's eyes flickered with killing intent, and instead of stopping to look around, he shot straight inside. The two Grand Elders gritted their teeth and followed. They shot right through the convergence of mutagen, but when they came out the other side, what was waiting for them was a large cloud of poison gas. "Patriarch," cried the Grand Elder with the injured foot, "this little punk fights dirty." Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior snorted coldly, then exhaled sharply, creating a blast of wind that spread out and dissipated the poison gas. At the same time, he grabbed the two Grand Elders, then continued after the fleeing Su Qing. It was already evening and darkness approached. Everything was getting cold and the mutagen was strong. Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior wouldn't have any problem continuing onward with flight, but the Grand Elders didn't have that luxury. That was especially true of the injured one. Thus, Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior coldly said, "You two catch up. I'm going to nab the kid." Tapping into his cultivation base, the Patriarch threw his head back and roared. At the same time, the Golden Vajra Warrior behind him started to grow taller until it was 90 meters in height. Then the giant started running forward. Each stride took it the same distance as it was tall, and standing on its head was the Patriarch. Someone who couldn't tap into spirit power wouldn't be able to see the Golden Vajra Warrior, so from a distance, it would seem like the Patriarch was floating through the air. The Patriarch is so mighty. The Patriarch is going to bring this brat's corpse back sooner rather than later. Both of the Grand Elders were visibly excited. As far as they were concerned, now that their Patriarch was taking action personally, the kid was going to die beyond the shadow of a doubt. But then time started to go by. 2 hours later, the two Grand Elders seemed less excited. Then they exchanged a bewildered glance, having long since lost sight of their Patriarch. They really couldn't figure out how a mere body cultivator in the chi condensation level could be so fast and skilled that the Patriarch hadn't dealt with him already. They were confused, but Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior was even more confused. Far from the location of the two Grand Elders, the Patriarch was glaring in frustration at the small figure speeding madly away from him in the distance. Although there was still a speed difference between the two, he had to admit that his target was very fast. Furthermore, every time he launched a fist strike with the power of the Golden Vajra Warrior projection, a glittering field of light would appear around the young man to protect him. There would be a boom, and then the glittering field of light would fill with cracks, but at the same time, his target would use the momentum to get further away. As night fell, the mutagen got stronger, and it seemed to be even worse on the path the young man took. Everything behind him was completely frigid. It caused even the Patriarch to worry a bit and forced him to circle around the coldness. In turn, that slowed him down and made the chase take even longer. Asterisk. "Damn it," Su Qing muttered. His face was pale and his eyes were bloodshot as he pushed forward with all the speed he could muster. His left hand was clenched so tightly into a fist that the blood vessels bulged on the back. It was a ghastly sight. Inside that hand was a scorpion tail. Back when he fought Flamecrow, he still had a bit of that tail left. However, as this chase continued, the venom was slowly draining out. There wasn't much left. He knew it would only keep him going for a short time. In his right hand was a paper talisman with barely visible calligraphy on it. That was the paper talisman he'd taken from Sergeant Thunder's nemesis. By now, the calligraphy was almost gone. However, thanks to the incredible speed he'd been maintaining, he had already spotted the familiar city ruins in the distance. Eventually, the boost from the scorpion tail faded, and Su Qing finally started to slow down. Gritting his teeth, he made one final leap, sailing through the stark moonlight and landing on the city wall. This was the place Su Qing had been trying to. He had no way to fight Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior or the two Grand Elders. and therefore, he had no choice but to find heavenly timing, earthly advantage, and human harmony. Heavenly timing was the mutagen in the forbidden region. Earthly advantage was the familiar terrain. And human harmony was the grooves in the city and the mutant beasts in the city magistrate's manor. By using these advantages, he hoped to get out of the sticky situation he was in. Once in the ruins, his speed slowed down significantly. Then he heard a rumbling sound behind him, whereupon a huge fist pierced through the air and slammed into him. Rumble! The defensive barrier, provided by the paper talisman, shattered. Blood sprayed out of Su Qing's mouth as he tumbled forward, his internal organs quivering as they sustained serious damage. The pain caused his vision to swim, but he gritted his teeth and ran frantically forward through the familiar streets. Moments later, he disappeared into the ruins. Not long after, the red-robed patriarch Golden Vajra warrior appeared on the scene. His expression was cold as he rolled his right hand to loosen his wrist. The punch he had just launched from a distance had been blocked by a talisman treasure. However, he knew that not all the force had been rebuffed, and he was convinced that a mere chi condensation cultivator who was hit by that blow would either die or be severely injured. The patriarch shot into the city. However, the moment he was inside, his face fell as his ears picked up on the sound of weeping. Then a sinister, cold aura drifted out from the street. Su Qing had just disappeared down. On this dark night, within the sinister moonlight and icy cold, a woman appeared at the end of the street. Given how far away she was, she seemed small, but as she walked forward, she grew larger and larger until she was taller than the surrounding buildings. Soon, she was fully 30 meters tall. She wore a white gown, had long black hair, and had no facial features. Her face was completely empty, as if it didn't exist. However, her long garment had countless human faces on it, all of them weeping. The weeping sounds mixed together into a mournful sound that echoed in the area. Surrounded by that sound, the faceless woman in white slowly walked toward Patriarch Golden Vajra warrior. As she neared, the weeping grew louder. Patriarch Golden Vajra warrior sucked in a breath. Despite how valiant he was, his heart pounded. He knew what this woman was, and as that realization sank in, he felt a growing sense of reverence. Without an ounce of hesitation, he turned and fled. He didn't continue his pursuit of Su Qing, but instead chose a different avenue to go deeper into the city. This brat is in the chi condensation level. He doesn't have much chance of surviving the dangers here, but I'm not going to rest easy until I can confirm he's dead. The patriarch's eyes shone with killing intent. Based on his past experience, he knew that the kid was someone that, if he didn't kill him right now, would return years later and slap him to death. With great care, Patriarch Golden Vajra warrior proceeded deeper into the city ruins. There were two options: find his target alive or recover his dead corpse. Meanwhile, Su Qing was back in his little cave that he had used as a hiding place in the past. Sitting there cross-legged, he breathed hard until he coughed up some clotted blood. Only then did some color return to his face. Wiping the blood from his mouth, he looked grimly out the crack to the outside. Then he gritted his teeth and started doing breathing exercises with the sea and mountain incantation. Thanks to all the effort fleeing, as soon as he recovered, he found himself at a breakthrough point with his cultivation base. I'm going to reach the 7th level of the sea and mountain incantation. Without hesitation, he attempted the breakthrough. In the 6th level, he could project the spectral image of a hobgoblin. At that point, he was able to kill the camp owner, who was in the 8th level of chi condensation. However, someone in the 9th level would be much more difficult to deal with. Because of that, he was eager to see what battle prowess he could attain in the 7th level. My sea and mountain incantation is uniquely incredible thanks to the blessing of the violet crystal. Taking a deep breath, he endured the pain in his chest and continued with his breathing exercises. The floor of Su Qing's cave was covered with bird feathers, and the air swirled with impure vital energy. The pile of rocks and other miscellaneous items he'd used to block the entrance had long since been corroded by mutagen. There was a lot more dust built up as well. Now that this area was a forbidden region, scavengers had already been coming through to explore. However, this refuge was so well hidden that no one had discovered it. The smell of dust and decay filled Su Qing's nostrils, but he ignored it. Sitting cross-legged, he cultivated the sea and mountain incantation, building up enough momentum to attempt a breakthrough to the 7th level. Outside, he heard the howls of the mutant beasts and the bone-chilling mourning of the grooves. It caused a somewhat vacant expression to fill Su Qing's face as he suddenly found himself back in the same spot from over half a year ago. He remembered the god's eyes opening, then the blood rain. It had been a real struggle for him to survive in the broken city after that. After that, he buried such thoughts and focused on cultivation. As his cultivation base rotated, spirit power poured into him. Eventually, popping sounds rang out within him, growing louder and louder until it was a roaring in his mind. Black filth oozed out of his pores more and more as the moments passed. During the process, he felt his flesh and blood growing astonishingly stronger. His blood vessels swelled as he felt painful tearing sensations ripping through him. Even his bones creaked. About 2 hours later, the roaring in his mind became like the constant crack of thunder. Then he opened his eyes, and violet light erupted from his pupils. And then the spectral hobgoblin appeared behind him. This time the hobgoblin looked different. It was an even deeper black color and was burlier. Its head didn't have a single horn. Instead, it had 2 horns like an ox, except they spiraled and had black sparks of lightning at their tips. Its face was more vicious, and when it opened its mouth, it seemed capable of devouring evil ghosts. Furthermore, it had sharp claws that, combined with its violet pupils, emanated a hair-raising brutality. Powerful fluctuations rolled off of the spectral hobgoblin, apparently piercing through the surrounding stone of the cave. It was a complete success with the spectral hobgoblin. This was the development that would occur when pushing the sea and mountain incantation to the perfect level. For most other people, this would indicate that he had reached the perfect level of body cultivation and chi condensation and couldn't go any further. However, Su Qing had reached this point at only the 7th level. Of course, the transformations to his body were also significant. He was slightly taller, and the violet light in his eyes lasted for longer after the breakthrough. As for his face, in the 6th level of the sea and mountain incantation, he had been incomparably fair and good-looking. But now, with the violet glint in his eyes, he could be considered almost enchanting were it not for the grime covering his face. Of course, Su Qing didn't care about that. He just cared about how much stronger he was getting. Eventually, he looked down and slowly clenched his hands into fists, noticing the blood vessels bulging through his skin. The violet light in his eyes slowly faded, but he could clearly sense how powerful he was. He was at least twice as strong as before. Is this the power of a hobgoblin? It was pitch black outside and there was no light in the cave, but Su Qing could actually see around him, though not to the extent of being able to see his shadow. That said, he could sense his shadow, so after considering the matter, he made another attempt to control it. After the time it takes an incense stick to burn, an excited gleam appeared in his eyes. He had much better control over his shadow now, to the point where he could even call it subtle. He could even take mutagen from the shadow and return it to his body. Of course, that wasn't a useful thing, but it proved that he was commanding increased control. After taking everything into consideration, Su Qing was certain that with his current level of battle prowess, he could defeat someone like the camp owner without relying on the statue's heavenly saber. All he would need would be a single punch. And if someone in the 8th level of chi condensation tried to meet the blow, their arm would explode. Unfortunately, I'm not even close to being able to deal with Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior. Su Qing shook his head. Although he hadn't directly clashed with the Patriarch, being forced to deal with his long-range fist attacks had been very illuminating. Even if Su Qing used his shadow to catch the man off guard, he knew that there was just no way he was strong enough to fight a Foundation establishment expert. That said, I should be able to kill those 2 fellows in the 9th level of chi condensation. Eyes gleaming, he looked through the crack to the outside. The bizarre sounds of the grooves continued to echo out, but they were off in the distance. The cave itself was quiet. Once again, Su Qing felt like he was in the past, and he even instinctively took out his iron skewer as he tried to decide what to do next. If he left the Forbidden Region, he felt confident that he could get to Antlerville. However, he also didn't feel like simply running away. That much was evident from the killing intent flickering in his eyes. If I don't kill some of these people, I'm always going to be worrying about potential calamity. Narrowing his eyes, he envisioned his old map of the city. He knew the city well. Thinking about all the different streets, he remembered where certain mutant beasts slept, where the birds hid, and other details. The city magistrate's manner, the coldness in his eyes grew more intense. His main goal was going to be leaving the city ruins, but if he encountered any people from the Golden Vajra Warrior sect, then he already knew how he would fight back. Sensing that the sounds outside were very distant, Su Qing opened up the cave and slowly crawled out. The cave opening was small and narrow, and Su Qing was already taller and bigger than before, so it was a bit of a struggle. But his expression was the same as ever as he forced himself out. He got a few scrapes and cuts in the process, but they healed almost instantly. After looking around vigilantly, he carefully started making his way through the ruins. This time, he moved with caution even greater than back in the jungle by the base camp. After all, there were a lot more grus and mutant beasts to worry about at nighttime here. Thankfully, he knew the general layout of the city. That, coupled with his speed, enabled him to avoid any dangers he came across. In those cases when fleeing wasn't an option, he ended matters with a lightning-fast attack. He continued through the mutagen for about 2 hours and was nearing the edge of the city when he heard a distant rumbling sound. With eyes flashing like a lone wolf, he prowled through the city toward the noise. Soon after, he saw 7 or 8 mutant beasts pursuing 2 people. They were none other than the Grand Elders from the Golden Vajra warrior sect. A short time after the two saw Su Qing and their patriarch disappear into the city, they followed. However, given it was the middle of the night, they decided not to venture into the depths of the city and had stayed near the edge. Unfortunately, there were just too many grus and mutant beasts. Furthermore, the hiding place they had picked was a far cry from the bird cave Su Qing had identified. Thus, it wasn't long before they were discovered. Not wanting to attract the attention of even more mutant beasts, they had simply fled, deciding to only start fighting if absolutely necessary. Because of that cautious approach and also their incredible strength, they had been able to deal with everything thus far. In fact, they were just on the point of being able to shake off the group of mutant beasts chasing them. However, that was when a cold streak of light suddenly shot toward them. It shot like an arrow through the night, heading straight toward the Grand Elder in the lead position. This was not the man who had clashed with Su Qing earlier, but instead was the one who had shown up later with Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior. Face falling, he quickly performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing an ice shield to rumble out around him. He also had a personal defensive barrier as well. The cold light moved with astonishing power, and it pierced through the ice defense, then stabbed into the defensive barrier. Spirit power fluctuations rolled out as cracks spread across the defensive barrier. However, it held strong. That was when the Grand Elder realized that he had been attacked with a black iron skewer. Pupils constricting, the Grand Elder looked over his shoulder at his companion, but by then it was too late. At the same moment as the first attack, a shadowy figure lunged out of an alley, becoming like a black lightning bolt that shot toward the other Grand Elder. That shadowy figure was none other than Su Qing. The attack with the skewer had been a feint, as his true goal was to take out the Grand Elder with the injured left foot. Su Qing moved with explosive speed, vastly superior to his limits with the 6th level of the sea and mountain incantation. The wind screamed as, in the blink of an eye, he was right next to the injured Grand Elder. The Grand Elder was injured, had to deal with strong mutagen and couldn't fly anymore. Because of that, he had a harder time moving than his companion did. When he realized the danger he faced, his eyes went wide, and a feeling of deadly crisis rose up in his heart. He dodged backward, but there was no way Su Qing was going to let him get away that easily. Jumping into the air, Su Qing clenched his right hand into a fist and unleashed a punch. Whether in terms of speed or strength, Su Qing filled the blow with everything he had. As he struck out, the vicious spectral hobgoblin appeared behind him, roaring noiselessly as its power focused on Su Qing's fist. Cracking sounds echoed out, and the air exploded from the immense force as the man's defensive barrier shattered like glass, and Su Qing's fist landed on his chest. A huge boom echoed through the stillness of the city. The Grand Elder coughed up blood like mad as his chest caved in and his organs were shattered. Then he flew backward like a kite with its string cut. He was in the 9th level of chi condensation, but his face was a mask of terror. Meanwhile, the flight talisman on his right leg glittered, and the power of flight swept through him, causing him to jerk up into the air. However, that was when another cold light shot toward him. This time it was a long sword that, in the briefest of moments, slashed directly through his right leg. Blood sprayed everywhere, accompanied by a miserable shriek as the flight talisman was cut away along with his leg. Before the leg could fall to the ground, Su Qing stamped his foot and launched himself into the air. As he did, the spot he had just occupied was filled with a host of wind blades shot by the other Grand Elder. Su Qing didn't even look behind himself. He stayed completely focused on the despairing Grand Elder as he tumbled down. Su Qing launched another punch, and the spectral hobgoblin roared. This time the blow landed on the Grand Elder's head. A thump rang out as the man quivered for a moment. Then his head exploded, sending blood everywhere as he died. The moment his corpse hit the ground, the pursuing mutant beasts pounced on it and tore it to pieces. Not slowing down a bit, Su Qing grabbed the flight talisman off the severed leg, turned, and shot toward the surviving Grand Elder. Su Qing licked his lips, looking like a wolf as he closed in. Die! The Grand Elder died a horrible death, and as his final scream echoed through the city, Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior noticed. As a Foundation establishment cultivator, he had acute senses and immediately looked up when he noticed the sound. Expression grim, he jumped into the air and started moving in the direction of the sound. Although there were dangerous creatures around, given his level, he had nothing to fear as long as he didn't encounter either a grue or an entire horde of mutant beasts. Not even the strong mutagen was much to worry about for him. Given the level of his cultivation base, he could stay in these ruins for as long as a month without any difficulty. After confirming he was heading in the right direction, the Patriarch let loose a loud cry backed with the power of his cultivation base, ensuring that even someone a great distance away could hear him. Keep that brat busy until I get there. As the words echoed out, he shot forward with explosive speed, making him look like a shooting star. Meanwhile, back on the field of the battle, the surviving Grand Elder was backing away from the incoming Su Qing. He had heard his Patriarch's orders, but at the same time, didn't want to end up dead. He didn't care if he ended up berated by the Patriarch. Su Qing's baleful aura was too intense, and he fought too ruthlessly. Therefore, the Grand Elder fell back at top speed, adding in the benefits of the flight talisman to move back hundreds of meters in the blink of an eye. Su Qing's eyes narrowed as he also heard Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior's words. However, he didn't stop chasing the Grand Elder. Scooping up his iron skewer along the way, he prepared to use his newly acquired flight talisman. Just before he did, though, his expression flickered, and then he turned and shot back in the opposite direction. Upon seeing this, a look of shock appeared on the fleeing Grand Elder's face. Then he sensed a wave of sinister coldness before realizing that an enormous figure was right next to him. It was a gigantic woman with no facial features and long black hair, wearing a flowing white garment. The countless faces on her garment wept mournfully, filling the area with a gruish aura and causing the moon above to turn the color of blood. From a distance, the Grand Elder looked like an ant in front of her. Because of the countless weeping faces, the Grand Elder trembled violently, and his expression turned to one of sorrow as he, too, began to weep. His eyes shone with immense terror, as if the weeping was beyond his control. Then his weeping merged with the weeping of the faces on the dress, until they seemed united. White energy then seeped out of the Grand Elder's eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, flowing into the faceless woman's dress. A moment later, the Grand Elder was a desiccated corpse that toppled to the ground, completely devoid of energy. At the same time, a new face appeared on the woman's dress. It was the Grand Elder's face. Though there was no expression on the face, as soon as it appeared on the white garment, it began weeping. Su Qing saw this happening, as did Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior, and both were shaken. Su Qing took a deep breath, suppressed his shock, and picked up speed as he fled into the ruins. In contrast, the newly arrived Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior was so shocked his scalp tingled, and he felt rooted in place. And that was because the faceless woman in white was heading in his direction. The Patriarch knew that, when facing an entity like this, one shouldn't make sudden moves. Someone who did so would end up like the Grand Elder from moments before. Therefore, he suppressed his terror and stood in place as the faceless woman slowly moved past him and off into the distance. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. At the same time, he felt that something strange was going. Running into a grue twice is strange. Why do I have this feeling? It has something to do with that brat. He really does fight dirty. Looking in the direction Su Qing had fled, the Patriarch felt more than ever that he had to exterminate him. Gritting teeth, he flew after him. The night echoed with roars that filled every corner of the ruins, along with the sounds of chewing, weeping, and laughter. Beneath the moonlight, the crumbled ruins seemed more demonic and gruish than ever. As Su Qing sped along, although he was familiar with the city night, he was still fearful of all the strange, gruish sounds. He also felt like he was the subject of countless malevolent gazes that sent frigid coldness into his body. Even as that cold feeling grew more intense, Su Qing passed the spot where, months before, he had set an ambush for a vulture, and that was when his pupils constricted. A short distance away, he saw the broken-down horse cart. Before, there had been a blood-soaked rabbit doll hanging from the axle, but it was in a different position now. It was now sitting on the cart itself, its back to Su Qing so that he couldn't see its face. Scalp tingling, Su Qing fled. Shortly after, Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior arrived in the same spot. Looking around, he spotted the cart, as well as the blood-soaked rabbit, which was now facing him. The eyes embedded in its face were dark, and the doll seemed ghoulish to the extreme, and it was looking at the Patriarch very eerily. The Patriarch's pupils constricted, and his hair stood on end. Stopping in place for a moment, he then crept away slowly before exhaling softly and continuing on his way. He didn't get too close to Su Qing. The Patriarch was convinced Su Qing used all sorts of evil tricks, including the ability to make mutagen stronger. Therefore, the Patriarch didn't want to approach him and directly attack. Instead, he decided to watch from a distance and wait until daylight to make a move. For a Foundation establishment cultivator to be so cautious in dealing with a Qi condensation cultivator would result in a huge loss of face if word got out. But given the circumstances, the Patriarch wanted to play it safe. Slowing down a bit, he kept trailing Su Qing from a distance. Su Qing sensed what was happening. He had already been preparing how to fight back, including getting his shadow ready to take action and making sure his black boluses were ready to throw out. He had felt confident that, though he couldn't unleash any fatal attacks, he could at least inflict some damage, and though he would be seriously injured in the clash, he should be able to escape. What was more, the added element of injury would help sell the next phase of his plan. But despite being a Foundation establishment expert, Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior was being extremely cautious, in turn causing Su Qing to be more cautious. Despite the fact that the man was keeping his distance, Su Qing still wanted to go through with his trap, so he kept moving at top speed toward the city magistrate's manor. It was located in the very middle of the city, where the mutagen was stronger than anywhere else. Yet for some reason, there were fewer mutant beasts there. As Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior observed what Su Qing was doing, his expression flickered, and a sensation of danger filled him. As Su Qing fled, the Patriarch looked at a nearby fallen building and suddenly stopped in place. In fact, not only did he not continue chasing, he actually backed up. This went completely beyond what Su Qing had planned for. Just when he was only a few hundred meters from the city magistrate's manor, Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior suddenly retreated. It's too late to change plans now. Gritting his teeth, Su Qing suddenly threw out a large quantity of black boluses. In fact, in the interests of achieving his goal, he threw out half of his entire collection. When they exploded, they created a massive vortex that caused waves of mutagen to rush forth, rippling the air, twisting everything, and making it impossible to see anything clearly. The level of mutagen at play was astonishing. The retreating Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior was shocked, but more than that, puzzled, as Su Qing was right in the middle of all the mutagen. Forgetting the danger of the mutagen itself, this event would surely attract mutant beasts and grooves, which would kill Su Qing for sure. It almost seemed like he was committing suicide. As the Patriarch wondered what was going on, a few hundred meters away in the city magistrate's manor, an intense rumbling shook everything in the area, followed by a terrifying roar. The ground trembled, and the blood-colored moon in the sky grew blurry. The Patriarch was visibly shocked, and the sensation of deadly crisis within him grew more intense than ever. Backing up even faster, he looked toward the sound and saw numerous shadowy figures flying out of the mansion. They were incredibly gaunt, with wings of black flame, and a stupefying level of mutagen on them that caused everything around them to ripple and distort. The shocked Patriarch's face went pale, and he gasped as the entire city magistrate's manor collapsed in on itself, leaving behind a huge hole in the ground. Crawling out of that hole was a gaunt 300-meter-tall figure, roaring to the heavens. It seemed as slender as a tree, and actually was more than 300 meters tall as it was only halfway out of the crater. It waved its arms, and its 10 fingers became long vines, some of which stabbed into the ground. Using the vines, the gaunt figure began pulling itself further out of the hole. "What the hell is this freaking thing?" the Patriarch blurted in his shock. Looking astonished beyond reason, he turned and fled at top speed. Then his heart filled with even more madness, as he realized that the winged creatures that had originally been attracted to the strong mutagen had for some reason emerged from that area and were now howling as they flew toward him. "What's going on here? Where's Kid?" The Patriarch's eyes went wide as he realized that, no matter how fast he fled, they were going to catch up. Having no other choice, he turned and unleashed an attack. The flying figures exploded, but strangely, they recovered after only a short moment and kept coming. What was more, the terrifying entity further back had almost climbed out of the giant hole in the ground. As Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior dealt with the maddeningly deadly situation, it was a short distance away, just beyond the area of strong mutagen, where Su Qing had found a crevice in a wall and was in hiding. From that position of safety, he watched events play out. Back when he had been exploring the city, he discovered more than one location where birds had roosted, and this crevice was one of them. When he'd found the cultivation technique in the city magistrate's manor and been severely injured in the process, he ended up hiding here to evade the mutant beasts chasing him. That said, it was too close to the city magistrate's manor for him to choose it as a long-term camping site. When the eyes of the god above opened and catastrophe began, all types of living beings were wiped out. The only type that weren't affected were birds for some unknown reason, and they instinctively were able to find safe hiding places. Although such locations weren't absolutely without risk, the chances of grus or mutant beasts discovering them were small. Of course, that was all comparatively speaking. Were it not for Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior being present, hiding in this place would have meant certain death in the circumstances. Seeing Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior in such bad condition, and also seeing the gigantic figure climbing out of the ground, Su Qing took in a deep breath. Then he gritted his teeth, charged out into the open, and tossed about a dozen black boluses in the direction of the fleeing Patriarch. When they exploded, the mutagen in the area became even more shockingly dense. At the same time, the explosion seemed to surpass a limit of some sort. All of a sudden, the countless malevolent gazes that had locked onto Su Qing after he emerged from the crevice shifted to look at a different subject. They were now looking at that influx of mutagen, and they weren't the only ones. Other grus and mutant beasts in the city all looked in the same direction. Then they started moving. A howl of rage erupted from Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior's mouth. Su Qing, looking over his shoulder as he fled, saw the grus and mutant beasts rushing toward the intense mutagen. The Patriarch also wanted to flee, but was being harried by the winged figures, making it impossible for him to do much. At that moment, his anxiety grew deeper, and his rage toward Su Qing more intense. Su Qing sped down a nearby road, getting further away from the city magistrate's manor and heading toward the edge of the city. But then, a wave of intense, sinister coldness hit him. He heard weeping from up ahead, and then the faceless woman in white appeared. One moment she was far away. The next, the gruish woman was right in front of him. She moved with such incredible speed that there was no way he could flee. As the coldness covered him, his mind went blank, almost as if it had been frozen in place. The countless faces covering the woman's garment wept mournfully, the sound piercing into Su Qing's mind. They created fluctuations that stirred his emotions, and it seemed like he might start weeping at any moment. But then, some of the faces on the faceless woman's dress suddenly stopped weeping and looked at Su Qing with blank expressions. A moment passed, and unexpectedly, they smiled and opened their mouths as if they were speaking. However, he heard no sound. More and more faces ceased weeping, until finally, more than half had smiled warmly at Su Qing and spoken to him, though he couldn't hear a single thing they were saying. All he could do was stare dumbstruck at the scene. Before he could make heads or tails of it, the faceless woman moved past him, and the weeping continued. Eventually, Su Qing felt he could move again. Struggling to breathe, he looked over his shoulder at the faceless woman. In the darkness of night, her white dress seemed like a beacon of flame. For some reason, the faces that smiled at him seemed very familiar, as if he knew them. And that was especially true of one face in particular. He had carried that person on his back to be cremated and had told him to rest in peace. It was the old man from the medicine shop. Su Qing stood there quietly looking at the figure until a look of understanding appeared on his face. Clasping hands, he bowed deeply and whispered, "Thank you." And that was the same thing the smiling faces had said moments ago. "Thank you." The arrival of the god's broken face was like the awakening of insects, which affected all living things and forced them to change. It changed the world into a colder and more brutal place. The forbidden regions were convergences of that coldness, but right now, as Su Qing watched the figure in white, he suddenly thought back to what Sergeant Thunder mentioned about their first meeting. "Do you know why I took you with me when we left that city? When I saw you cremating all those bodies with the fire shining on you, it seemed like you had brought a bit of warmth and kindness into this brutal world." Just like Sergeant Thunder back then, Su Qing felt like he sensed a bit of warmth right now. It came from the faceless woman in white, and from the numerous smiling faces that had thanked him. It came from the humanity that this brutal world couldn't take away. Eventually, Suqing again clasped hands and bowed deeply. Then he turned back in the direction of the city wall and started moving. *********. Apparently, he had thrown out so many black boluses that he pushed the mutagen in that part of the city beyond the brink, making it like a bright torch on a dark night. Perhaps it was a matter of cause and effect. Regardless, he didn't encounter much danger at all as he sped toward the outskirts of the city. Once outside, he looked back into the city and could hear the roars and screams echoing through the darkness. I wonder when I'll be back, he thought. Then he hopped off the city wall and sped away into the night. In order to maximize his speed, he put his new flight talisman on his leg, then poured spirit power into it. He instantly shot up into the air. Sailing along with the wind against his face was a new feeling, as was the incredible speed he was capable of. This was his first time flying. He looked down at the world speeding by below, a somewhat dazed expression on his face. So this is what it feels like to be a bird flying in the air. Having reached the 7th level of the sea and mountain incantation, he had perfect control over his body, and thus quickly acclimated to flying. Combined with his natural speed and power, he was able to soar for long periods before dropping back down, and he could thrust his fists behind him to gain added bursts of speed. From a distance, he looked like a beam of light speeding through the air of the forbidden region. Any other person would have been forced to worry about mutagen, but not him. It didn't take long before he saw the boundary of the forbidden region. Bursting through it, he entered the outside world and felt the warm breeze against his face. It quickly drove out the cold of the forbidden region. Hovering in the air, Suqing looked thoughtfully toward Antlerville and then shifted to look in a different direction. After living in the scavenger base camp for half a year, Suqing had picked up quite a bit of knowledge. For instance, he had learned the names of many places and locations in the area and knew the general location of the Golden Vajra Warrior sect headquarters. It wasn't yet sunrise, and the moon didn't do much to illuminate the darkness, but he could still make out mountains in the distance. Hovering there, he looked back and forth between Antlerville and the Golden Vajra Warrior sect headquarters. "I'm not going to let this go," he murmured. He wasn't sure what would happen with Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior in the ruins, but he doubted the man was going to perish. However, he would probably end up severely injured, and it didn't seem likely that he would extricate himself any time. Suqing knew that if he went toward Antlerville immediately, he would reach it without any problems, but he just couldn't make himself do that. After thinking about it more, his eyes shone with cold light as he tapped into the power of the flight talisman to head toward the Golden Vajra Warrior sect. Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior was in a bad situation, and 2 of the sect's grand elders were dead. The sect itself was in a state of unprecedented weakness, so now would be the best time to strike a deadly blow. This was Suqing's personality. Any other person would probably have chosen this moment to flee, but Suqing had learned from a young age that potential calamities needed to be eradicated as quickly as possible. Even if this specific potential calamity couldn't be dealt with fully, he could at least inflict some pain on his enemy, and enough pain could turn into a deterrent. That was the law of the slums, and that was the law of the scavengers. Whether or not that was the law of the chaotic world in general, Suqing wasn't sure. But that was his law. He wasn't convinced that killing 2 grand elders would be enough of a deterrent. Suqing sped along, and as the sun rose over the horizon, he caught sight of his destination. The headquarters of the Golden Vajra Warrior sect. It consisted of numerous buildings on a mountain. As the sun shone on the grand hall atop the mountain, it looked incredibly inspiring and beautiful. However, most of the sect cultivators were out searching for Suqing right now. There was only a small group of disciples left behind to stand guard, and only a few of them were visible this early in the morning. They all had arrogant looks on their faces, as though they represented a paramount figure in all creation. Leading into the sect was an arched bridge, where 5 disciples stood chatting and laughing. Their conversation revolved around how their patriarch had gone out to look for some child. From the tone of their conversation, it was obvious they thought this whole thing was a big fuss over a minor issue. Further inside, some disciples sat cross-legged in their quarters, doing breathing exercises. The sect leader was in the grand hall, flipping through some accounting records for the local cities and scavenger base camps. Similar to the disciples outside, he wasn't convinced the patriarch even needed to be outside the sect. "It's just some scavenger. He might be skilled, but our 2 grand elders can handle him easily. There's no reason for the patriarch himself to have gotten involved. Now the sect is completely empty. The sect leader shook his head. His opinion didn't really matter, as there was no way anyone would defy the patriarch. As all members in the sect sat around not doing much, no one noticed Su Qing high above the sect, looking down coldly. After first checking the direction of the wind, he circled around the sect until it was downwind of him. He also determined the speed of the wind. Face completely expressionless, he took out a large amount of poison powder and scattered it. In that one moment, he threw out about 80% of all of his poison powder reserves. As the different powders mixed, they created an astonishing combination of poisons that drifted into the sect with the wind. Instead of taking any further action, he watched and waited. It didn't take much time before the wind turned brown, and then black. Su Qing's eyes flickered coldly. That should do it. The black wind finally attracted the attention of the cultivators in the sect. The first to notice it were the disciples chatting on the bridge. The entire group looked up in astonishment and shock. Hey, what's that? The black wind passed through a tree which instantly withered. The disciples' faces fell. Poison! As the cry rang out, other disciples in the sect heard, and they rushed out into the open to try to drive away the poison wind. That was when Su Qing suddenly appeared, like a bolt of lightning that shot toward the sect headquarters. As the cultivators of the Golden Vajra warrior sect reacted with shock and fury, and as warning bells clanged inside the sect, Su Qing landed on the ground halfway up the mountain. A boom rang out, and cracks spread out from his feet as he looked up with killing intent at the shocked enemy cultivators. Then he attacked. A huge boom echoed out. As he moved with shocking speed, screams filled the air and corpses fell to the ground. Although the majority of the disciples were out of the sect, that still left plenty behind to fight. Soon, enraged shouts filled the air, and more figures were rushing toward Su Qing. An ambush. Damn it, I can't believe someone is actually launching a surprise attack on us. Kill him. Meanwhile, in the grand hall, the sect leader realized something was happening and strode out furiously. When he saw the chaos and the poison wind, he shouted, "All disciples, consume anti-poison pills and drive this poison wind away." Then he glared down toward the area halfway down the mountain where the rumbling sounds came from. Ice cold, he rushed in that direction. However, Su Qing wasn't fighting the sect disciples there. Instead, he was moving away at top speed and throwing black boluses behind him. Some exploded when contacting the ground, others exploded in midair. All of them created vortexes of mutagen. It was like the mutagen in the area was alive as it converged rapidly on the mountain. Mutagen! The disciples who had been about to charge in that direction saw what was happening and instinctively backed up. Some were close to the vortexes, and the sudden increase in mutagen caused their skin to start turning greenish-black. "This is outrageous," the sect leader shouted as he arrived from the grand hall. Cultivation base fluctuations that surpassed the perfect level of chi condensation rolled out. This was a level of strength beyond the grand elders Su Qing had killed, and was second only to the patriarch of the sect. The sect leader's golden robe fluttered around him, and grim killing intent pulsed on his face. However, when he saw Su Qing, a scavenger and a very young one at that, a tremor passed through him. He had no need to guess who this person was. "It's you." As the realization hit him, his heart pounded. "What are you doing here?" The sect leader glared at Su Qing, his heart pounding with shock. Actually, he wasn't sure if he could believe his eyes, but the young man in front of him wore a black jerkin, had wild and messy hair, and was covered in grime. What was more, his jerkin was deeply stained with blood and carried a baleful aura. His messy hair and the grime on his face made it difficult to clearly see his facial features. But when the poison wind lifted the hair from his face, it was impossible to miss his indescribably cold eyes. The moment the sect leader made eye contact, he felt a frigid coldness filling his heart. Having seen Su Qing's portrait, the moment the sect leader laid eyes on him, he recalled his scavenger moniker. "You're the kid." He was well aware that the sect patriarch as well as two grand elders were out chasing this very person, as were a whole host of sect disciples. But now, the patriarch and grand elders had yet to return, and the boy they were chasing had unexpectedly shown up at their front door. Fear welled up in the sect leader, but there was no time to think about the matter at the moment. He instantly started an incantation gesture, causing a rushing wind to spring up and drive away the poison. At the same time, the wind swelled into a wave of air that shot toward Su Qing. Su Qing assessed the situation coldly. Ignoring the sect leader, he simply jumped out of the way of the attack. then sped off in another direction, continuing to throw out black boluses. As booms echoed out, the sect leader felt the bizarre effects of the black boluses, and his face fell. Stamping his foot, he shot after Su Qing. However, Su Qing wasn't interested in fighting him. He dodged again, then used the flight talisman for speed, continuing to meander through the sect. As a result, the sect leader was also forced to use a flight talisman. From a distance, it was possible to see the sect leader chasing Su Qing, sending out attacks that caused explosions left and right. Su Qing threw out another black bolus, which exploded, and then he threw out another. Damn it, the sect leader raged. He wanted to do something to stop Su Qing, but they were both using flight talismans with the same top speed, so the sect leader couldn't catch up. Before long, the constant explosions of black boluses ensured that the entire Golden Vajra warrior sect was filled with vortexes, and shocking levels of mutagen were rushing toward it from all sides. In fact, it almost resembled a forbidden region. By the time Su Qing ran out of pills, the entire sect was one massive vortex. As the vortex spun and the mutagen rushed in, the sky was obscured. The mutagen became something like a roiling fog that filled the entire area. Howls and screams rang out from within the fog, as the disciples therein were overwhelmed with astonishment. Furthermore, there just weren't enough disciples to deal with the poison wind, and therefore, the poison powder circulated and became part of the fog. In all corners of the sect, plants and vegetation withered and died, and even rocks started hissing and melting. Agonized shrieks could be heard everywhere. The Golden Vajra warrior sect was in a really bad state. The combination of the mutagen and the poison was simply terrifying. Furthermore, it all happened in the space of 100 breaths of time, so quickly that nobody could possibly react fast enough. The sect was in such chaos that many disciples were tripping over each other to flee. The poison-negating pills they'd taken weren't strong enough to deal with the poison, so blood oozed out of their eyes, ears, nose, and mouth as they screamed piteously. Some tried to go into hiding, but it didn't do any good. Echoing over everything were the enraged shouts of the sect leader as he chased Su Qing. As the sect descended into absolute madness, Su Qing sped up and then disappeared in a flash. As the search for him continued, a flicker of fire suddenly appeared within the fog. Those who could see it felt their scalps tingling in shock. The sect leader was astonished and was forced to abandon his pursuit to lead disciples to put out the fire. Unfortunately, there wasn't just one fire. Flames flickered in numerous locations and quickly spread into a massive conflagration. "Kid," the sect leader howled, his voice thrumming with hatred. Unfortunately, there was no time to search for Su Qing as he was wrapped up dealing with the fires. Meanwhile, Su Qing was visiting one beautiful sect building after another. He would go inside, rifle around and take any valuables he found, then set the place on fire before moving on. He kept a very quick pace. At a certain point, he noticed a building far more extravagant and beautiful than the others. There also happened to be a plaque above the door, inscribed with the name of the building. Treasure Pavilion. Eyes narrowing, Su Qing clenched his hand into a fist and launched a blow at the door. The door of the treasure pavilion shattered, and poison gas rushed inside. Su Qing followed, and looked around to see that the walls were covered in shelves. Arrayed on those shelves were all sorts of medicinal pills, spirit coins, and prized treasures. As Su Qing looked around, his heart started pounding. He quickly started grabbing everything he could. Just before he was about to leave, he noticed that the poison gas was seeping into a part of the wall that normally wasn't visible. Looking closer, he saw the very faint outline of a door. Su Qing's eyebrows shot up. Stepping forward, he kicked the door. The outline of the door became more obvious as a result, but it didn't break. Making a faint expression of surprise, Su Qing clenched his hand into a fist. Cracking sounds rang out from within him, and the spectral hobgoblin appeared. Roaring soundlessly, it combined its fist with his, and he unleashed another blow. Another boom rang out, and the door collapsed, revealing a hidden room behind it. There was only one thing inside the room, a cloth bag the size of his palm. Shocked, he reached out to grab it. However, in that very moment, numerous beams of light erupted from the bag, shooting down to form a symbol on the ground. Then, the complicated symbol glittered as it projected a host of wind blades around the bag. Su Qing pulled his hand back and took a close look at the wind blades and the bag they protected. It seemed obvious that this was some sort of precious item. "What is this thing?" Frowning at the spirit power fluctuations that came off of it, he finally snorted coldly, took out a black bolus and crushed it. Mutagen rushed into the area, filling the secret room. The symbol on the ground glittered, but wasn't able to defend against the corrosion caused by the mutagen. It dimmed, then cracking sounds could be heard as the symbol was destroyed. Without any hesitation, Su Qing grabbed the cloth bag, then turned and fled. Outside, he looked around at the chaos in the Golden Vajra warrior sect, including the howls of grief, the mutagen, the poison gas, and the fires raging. The flight talisman glittered as he flew into the sky, his facial expression as cold as ever. He knew full well that he'd only gained an advantage in his sneak attack because the patriarch wasn't in the sect. The longer he stayed around, the more dangerous things would get. His goal had been to show up, kill as many people as possible, destroy as much of the headquarters as he could, and steal anything he could get his hands on. Having accomplished those things, he decided to make his getaway. However, that was when a howl of rage echoed out, and the disheveled sect leader flew toward him and attacked. Su Qing's eyes flickered with killing intent as he unleashed the power of the 7th level of the sea and mountain incantation. The spectral hobgoblin appeared, and he launched a punch at the incoming sect leader. A boom echoed out and the sect leader was shoved backward. Then, just as he was about to press the attack, he saw a violet saber forming behind Su Qing. The heavenly saber slashed down, directly toward the sect leader. Looking shocked, the sect leader fell back into the poison wind and the mutagen fog, with the violet saber following him. Su Qing didn't continue the attack. Eyes flashing, he backed up, then turned into a beam of light that shot away at high speed. Before he could make his way off into the distance, though, 7 figures emerged from the fog and launched vicious attacks. The immense power of the attacks shattered the air where Su Qing had just been hovering, causing massive rumbling sounds to echo out. This seemed to be a strength similar to the Foundation establishment level. If Su Qing chose to engage instead of dodge, he would have been hit directly by the attack. These 7 figures were old men whose faces were now pale, with blood oozing out of their mouths. The attack they had just launched was a combination move accomplished by means of a secret magic. Right now, they were eyeing Su Qing and trying to decide whether or not to chase him. "Dharma protectors," the sect leader said. "Don't give chase." The sect leader staggered out of the fog. One of his arms had been severed and the stump was dripping blood. His face was ashen and it looked like he could hardly stay on his feet. "That criminal is too cautious. I can't believe he didn't press the attack against me earlier. Right now our priority is to clear the poison wind and mutagen from the sect. Then we wait for the patriarch to return." The sect leader was feeling very frustrated. He had intentionally sustained injury in the hopes of luring Su Qing into a fight. In the end, he failed. Meanwhile, the 7 Dharma protectors kept their mouths shut. Some of them helped the sect leader, while the others stared blankly at the chaos in the sect, then sighed and hurried forward to help. Slowly but sure, the day passed. By the time evening came, the sect was mostly clear of poison and mutagen. As for the former, it mostly came down to the disciples, wind-type magical techniques. As for the latter, they had to destroy masses of spirit coins and use the resulting pure spirit power to dilute the mutagen. It was a huge loss. The sect headquarters was in shambles. Even the grand hall atop the mountain was in ruins, and most of the buildings were collapsed or damaged by fire. Restoring things to their former glory was going to be expensive. Even worse, every surviving disciple was polluted with high levels of mutagen. Most were greenish-black from head to toe, and purifying them would take massive amounts of white boluses and dust-purging pills. The sect leader and the Dharma protectors were irritated and exhausted when, off in the distance, a beam of light appeared. Patriarch Golden Vajra warrior had returned. He was in bad shape. He had numerous wounds, his hair was disheveled, and he looked furious. After fighting his way out of the forbidden region, he had already promised that he would pay any price to see the kid dead. Then he spotted the sect headquarters in the distance, and he gaped in astonishment before speeding forward and looked down at the ruins. When the disciples saw their patriarch, they wept. "Patriarch, when you were gone, the kid came and ran rampant in the sect. Lots of disciples were killed or injured. Patriarch, that goddamn criminal cleared out our treasure pavilion, and what he didn't take, he polluted with mutagen. Patriarch, the kid has no humanity. So many disciples are poisoned, and we can't dispel the poison." Only the sect leader and Dharma protectors didn't join in. As the wails of the disciples filled the air, Patriarch Golden Vajra warrior looked at his destroyed sect, the injured disciples, the sect leader with his severed arm, and the injured Dharma protectors. The patriarch slowly started trembling. His face went from ashen white to burning red, and finally to a livid green color. Staggering in place, he coughed up a massive mouthful of blood. Panting, he clenched his hands tightly into fists, and his eyes became so bloodshot he looked like he was ready to eat someone alive. Throwing his head back, he howled, "I'm going to kill you." His voice echoed like thunder, but it didn't quite reach all the way to the teleportation portal in the city of Antlerville. Xianxia stood there in line at the massive portal. The portal itself was constructed atop an octagonal altar and was covered with complex magical symbols. Every time it activated, brilliant, colorful light rose high into the sky. The portal guards all had extraordinary cultivation bases, and they kept cold eyes on everyone in the line. Based on their disposition, it seemed they were ready to instantly slaughter anyone who acted out of line. Eventually, everyone in front of Xianxia teleported away, and he was next in line. He walked up to the altar and into the middle of all the complex magical symbols. Then he looked out at the surrounding lands that had been his home for all these years. The setting sun cast gentle light over the lands. The breeze in the 7th month was warm, causing his hair to sway as he looked around. He looked in the direction of the city ruins. He looked in the direction of the scavenger base camp. Finally, he looked coldly in the direction of the Golden Vajra warrior sect. "This isn't over," he murmured. His eyes glittered coldly as the teleportation portal activated, and brilliant light rose high, washing over him until he disappeared. A moment later, the light vanished, and Xianxia was nowhere to be seen. It was the 8th month, the limit of heat. The scorching sun infused the wind with heat which spread out to warm the lands. However, the solar terms were changing, making it obvious that the heat of summer was waning. Eventually, it would have no choice but to watch helplessly as the geese returned and the crows migrated back to their normal haunts. Then, it would wait until the new solar term, white dew. Compared to the people who lived beneath it, the sun had a much easier time seeing the island below, surrounded by the sea of endlessness. After all, the continent of South Phoenix was really just an island. It had an elliptical shape and was divided in half by a mountain range that ran diagonally from north to south like a crouching dragon. They were called the Mountains of Truth. The part of the island west of the mountains made up about 70% of the continent and was the largest forbidden region. In fact, it bore the name Forbidden by the Phoenix. It was filled with sinister jungles that covered many ancient ruins, as well as drifting fog, numerous mutant beasts, countless grus, and very strong mutagen. As for the land east of the mountains, it took up about 30% of the continent and was where humankind resided. There happened to be a very unique location there. That was the spot where the northern part of the Mountains of Truth made contact with the sea. This location had Forbidden by the Phoenix to the west, human lands to the east, the Sea of Endlessness to the north, and a branch of the Mountains of Truth to the south. The topography created the largest port in South Phoenix, where huge cargo ships sailed in and out constantly. Some came from other islands to trade, while others came from the revered ancient mainland. Being such a strategic point, it was obvious that a powerful organization would want to control the area, and as such, it made sense that this was where Seven Blood Eyes kept their headquarters. From a distance, it was possible to see that the city attached to the port was divided into 7 sections, with one part being the port district. Overall, it was an astonishingly beautiful and powerful-looking city. This place was the capital city of Seven Blood Eyes. Next to it were 7 peaks that were the northern terminus of the Mountains of Truth. Atop each peak was a 300-meter stone statue of an eye. Each eye was a different color, but they all seemed to look out with sharp gazes. Whether it was day or night, those eyes never closed, and in fact, they formed a grand spell formation that covered the area. The 7 eyes looked out over the lands like the eyes of a massive beast, awe-inspiring and cold, such that anyone who looked at them felt shaken to the core. That was the origin of the sect's name, 7 Blood Eyes. In fact, the sect headquarters was made up of the capital city and those 7 mountain peaks. The tallest were the 7th peak, which was next to the port, and the 1st peak. They were like 2 giants looking out over South Phoenix and casting fear into the hearts of all. Although humans occupied 30% of South Phoenix, their lands were still full of many dangers. The wilderness was full of mutagen, and many mutant beasts and vicious outlaws lurked there. Though the mutant beasts weren't as fierce as those in the forbidden regions, they were still dangerous enough that any humans who left their cities would need to fear for their lives. As for the outlaws, given there was no law and order in the wilderness, encountering them could be worse than dying. Therefore, most humans longed for nothing more than to live in a city. And 7 Blood Eyes, capital city, was the grandest city in all of South Phoenix. It was a bustling place protected by the Seven Blood Eyes formation, which kept out the mutagen and thus improved the lifespans of everyone who lived inside. That was why so many people dreamed of joining Seven Blood Eyes. Many people longed to become a member, and those who became members never wanted to leave. However, the capital city had a lot of very strict rules, and there was a proverbial whip hanging over the heads of everyone who lived in the city. The name of that whip, survival of the fittest. In the city center by the port, 3 enormous teleportation portals were constantly being opened and closed. They were organized like the character Chinese letter, and people streamed in and out of them nonstop. At one point, one of the teleportation portals flared to life and a young man appeared. He wore a dark jerkin, baggy pants, and hemp sandals. He was covered in dried bloodstains, had wild, unkempt hair, and his face was smudged with grime. However, his eyes sparkled like stars. As he stepped out of the portal, he heard the bustle of people and the crash of waves. The wind was humid and warm, causing him to immediately feel sticky. They were all new sensations to this young man, who was of course Xianxia, just having arrived from Antlerville. "I'm here." Having just experienced teleportation, Xianxia's head hurt a bit, and he rubbed the bridge of his nose. He didn't linger on the portal but stepped off and looked around. Everything was operating in an orderly fashion. Guards in black suits of armor patrolled the area. The teleportation portals all had long lines snaking away from them, filled with men and women with packed bags of all sizes. There were also caravans present. All of these people looked hopeful, as though they longed to settle down in the city. These teleportation portals weren't cheap, which made their hope burn even hotter. Xianxia examined his surroundings as he joined the line that led to the exit. Unlike the Antlerville portals, one had to pass an inspection before being allowed out. As he waited, Xianxia looked outside and saw the vast, dark sea beyond. In another direction were the mountains, which were particularly conspicuous in the evening sun. That was especially true of the 7 statues of the eyes, which sent out fluctuations that stretched high into the sky and made the area above the statues swirl like a vortex. Within that vortex, the swirling clouds seemed to conceal some massive, rare beast that would occasionally release a holy growl. The scene left Xianxia feeling shaken. Eventually, the person in front of him in line passed inspection, got their Jade entry slip, and headed into the city. It was his turn, so he breathed a sigh of relief and focused on the inspection. "Present your travel permit and explain the purpose of your visit." There was a desk in front of Xianxia, behind which sat a young man and woman. The young man was handsome and wore a gray robe, but had his eyes closed as if he were sleeping. He emanated intense spirit power fluctuations. The young woman also wore a gray Taoist robe and looked to be only 17 or 18 years old. She was pretty, with fair skin and glittering eyes that a person could easily become lost in. The person who had just spoken was the girl. Looking up at Xianxia, she seemed completely oblivious to the grime that covered him. Apparently, she had seen plenty of scavengers like him. After speaking to him, she pulled out a jade slip to record the information he gave. From what Xianxia could sense, her spirit power fluctuations weren't very intense, yet for some reason, he felt a sense of danger in her presence. Even still, he was certain that in a battle to the death, he could kill her. Calmly reaching into his sack, he pulled out his identity medallion and handed it to her. Looking surprised, she took the medallion, inspected it, then handed it back to Xianxia. As she did, her eyes were no longer as cold as before, and in fact she looked at him with a meaningful expression. "I had no idea you were a new junior brother here to join the sect. I hope you enjoy your stay in 7 Blood Eyes." Xianxia was a bit puzzled by her wording, but he took the identity medallion and then glanced at the jade slip, which he had expected her to give him as his entry pass. "You don't need a jade slip for merit points like ordinary people," she explained. "You can just use your identity medallion. That medallion also qualifies you to enter the city. However, let me remind you that you must take the entrance assessment as soon as possible, and try to acclimate to life in 7 Blood Eyes as quickly as you can." Having said that, she ignored him. Wrapped up in his thoughts, Xianxia left the inspection area. As he did, he couldn't help but notice the envious looks of the people behind him in line. Ducking his head down, he looked at the identity medallion and hurried away. After he was gone, the young man behind the desk opened his eyes and smiled. "Since when did you become so friendly?" he asked. "You offered kind words to a newcomer and gave him some advice." "Because he had an identity medallion from the 7th peak, just like me," she replied coolly. "It was only white, but you never know what will happen in the future. It doesn't take any merit points to say something nice and offer some advice. If he rises to prominence eventually, today might just count as a lucky encounter for me. Next, she said, beckoning at the next person in line. Come on, there's no way he has a good future ahead of him, the young man said. He's obviously a scavenger. For him, getting a white medallion isn't going to be some stroke of good fortune. Who knows if he'll even pass the entry assessment? Besides, how will he even afford the 30 spirit coin living fee and all the expensive cultivation resources he'll need? I bet he doesn't last 2 months. Either he'll be expelled or poof. The young man made a fist, then snapped it open wide. He'll just disappear. He spoke softly enough that there was no way for Su Qing to hear him. After all, Su Qing was already some distance away in the city. As he walked along, he felt more and more shocked. This place was incredibly prosperous and bustling. Any given building he saw was vastly more luxurious and beautiful than the old city magistrate's manor. Blue-gray tiles were everywhere, as were vibrant green plants. Everything looked very neat and clean. There were people in every direction he looked, and their clothes were all clean. Most of them wore silk, and he saw almost nobody in hemp clothing. At the same time, everyone had indifferent expressions as they hurried on their way. As the evening grew darker, he noticed colorful lamps and lanterns of all varieties. The light they cast made the streets as bright as day. Surprisingly, the buildings on either side of the street were very quiet. Off in the distance, he noticed a narrow canal within which was a small boat. On the boat was a young woman in a Taoist robe, her face covered with a veil. She was tossing some medicinal pills into the water, where a host of fish circled, occasionally jumping out and creating ripples in the water. He saw some boys jumping into the water as well, struggling with the fish to get the pills. It was a really strange sight. Nothing seemed familiar to Su Qing, so he kept his guard up. This city seemed nothing like the scavenger base camp, but at the same time, it wasn't like the small city whose slums he had lived in. However, there was one similarity. Su Qing caught a faint, familiar scent in the air. It wasn't easy to detect, but he had honed his sense of smell in both the slums and scavenger base camp, and had detected this smell often in both places. It was the scent of blood. After noticing it, Su Qing looked around with increased vigilance. He didn't walk down the middle of the street. Instead, he stuck to the shadowy areas to the side. That was his custom. His plan was to find an inn where he could rest. The smell of blood made him want to stay off the street, and he had no interest in investigating where the smell came from. Right now, his priority was to pass the entry assessment, officially join 7 Blood Eyes, and make sure he didn't have to worry about the Golden Vajra warrior sect chasing him down. As the evening light faded into darkness, Su Qing continued to look around for a suitable place to stay. Darkness grew deeper, the city became quiet, and pedestrians walked faster to reach there. Lamplight shone from the buildings, but all doors were closed tight, and there was no sound. Most of the businesses were the same, and the few that still had doors open didn't have any customers inside. By the time the sun finally set, the streets were completely empty. Su Qing's eyes narrowed, and he hurried on looking for an inn. After about the time it takes an incense stick to burn, he finally spotted one up ahead, and was about to head toward it when a shadowy figure emerged from a nearby alley, with 8 burly men in hot pursuit, vicious grins on their faces. Trying to run? Where do you plan to run to? It's been a long time since we've met someone brazen enough to steal merit points from one of our marks. Su Qing saw that the person being pursued was a woman, apparently injured. She stumbled as she ran, and her hair was in disarray, but a vicious expression was on her face. Su Qing looked away. This matter had nothing to do with him, so he simply continued on to the inn. However, upon seeing Su Qing, the young woman's eyes glittered and she suddenly yelled, "Hey, you have the merit points now. What are you standing around for? Run!" Su Qing glared coldly at the woman, wondering if she really thought her clumsy trick would work. When he looked at her, she shivered subconsciously as a sensation of icy cold swept through her. In fact, the sensation of danger she got from Su Qing surpassed that from her pursuers. She suddenly had a very bad feeling, but she couldn't take her words back now, so she gritted her teeth and kept running. The sea wind stirred Su Qing's hair and caused his baggy pants to ripple. He seemed like an unsheathed blade as he stood there with cold eyes watching the woman rush off in another direction. He hesitated. He didn't want his first act in the city to be a killing, so he looked away and continued toward the inn. However, as the saying went, the tree may wish for quiet, but the wind will not subside. As the sea breeze hit the shore, it seemed a fight was brewing. Among the 8 burly men chasing the woman, one had a vicious scar on his face. He seemed to be the leader. Seeing what was happening, he laughed coldly and said, "I don't care what's going on here. Grab that boy for me. He has the fluctuations of the 6th or 7th level of body refinement, so he's probably got some merit points." His underlings split up, some of them running to grab the woman, and the others heading towards Su Qing. Su Qing frowned as he sized up the situation. The 4 men coming after him were all cultivators, and they seemed to be in the 6th level of qi condensation. From the look of it, they focused on body refinement. He really didn't want his first act in the city to be a killing, so he backed away from them and growled, "I don't know her." "It doesn't matter, Horson. It's bad luck for you either way." One of the burly men laughed coldly and launched a fist strike. The other 3 also prepared attacks, with one of them pulling out a blade. The moonlight shining on the weapon made it obvious it was coated in poison. There were some people in the world who loved to dance in front of the gates of hell. Su Qing had hoped to avoid a fight, but since these people were coming at him with killing intent, he had no choice. Without a word, he stopped in place and retreated no further. Then he lunged forward as fast as lightning, moving past his attacker's fist and putting his left hand on the man's forehead. The speed with which he moved was nothing short of astonishing. A popping sound rang out. There was no scream. Su Qing was already as strong as the great circle of body refinement, and thus his movement caused the man's head to instantly explode. Blood and gore rained down in a mist as Su Qing walked forward, his expression calm. Bypassing the blade held by the next opponent, Su Qing used his shoulder to strike a blow. The blade wielder's torso shattered. Next, Su Qing launched ranged fist attacks at the 2 remaining men. They tried to retreat, but the pulse of the attack moved through the air and slammed into them, caving in their chests and causing blood to erupt from their mouths. They fell to the ground, dead. In the space of 2 breaths of time, Su Qing had killed all 4 men. The sight of this caused the other 4 men to stop and stare at Su Qing, with their jaws hanging open. "Emmy's misunderstanding, we," stammered the leader. Gone was his arrogant attitude from before, and he was literally shaking. Seeing the cold look in Su Qing's eyes, he stumbled backward, his mind reeling. As he did, Su Qing started moving. A moment later, the other 3 men in the group coughed up mouthfuls of blood as gaping holes appeared in their temples. They toppled over. Walking past them, Su Qing wiped the blood from his hands and then went after the fleeing leader. When Su Qing killed, he made sure to wipe out any and all potential calamities. In a flash, he was right in front of the man, whereupon he raised his hand. Before he could drop it, though, the man started babbling. "Fellow Taoist, I work for the Night King. Don't do anything rash." Su Qing's hand stopped moving, and he looked at the ashen-faced, trembling man. "Are you a 7 Blood Eyes disciple?" Looking surprised, the man replied, "Not 7 Blood Eyes, but—" Before he could finish, Su Qing's hand dropped onto the man's skull. A thump rang out and blood sprayed. Su Qing bent down and searched the corpse. Then he looked off into the night. Not being familiar with the layout of the city, he didn't bother trying to find the fleeing woman who was long gone. However, he would remember what she looked like. Looking at the corpses in the street, he was trying to decide what to do with them when he suddenly turned in the direction of the inn and tensed in preparation for a fight. Standing just outside the door of the inn was an old man who had appeared there moments ago. He wore the robe of an innkeeper, had a hunched back, and the sallow skin of his face had age spots. He looked somewhat sickly. Seeing Su Qing looking at him, he flashed a smile full of yellow teeth. "Interested in selling those corpses, boy? I see 8 of them. I'll give you 10 spirit coins apiece." Su Qing was taken aback. This was the first time he had ever heard of someone buying corpses. Instead of answering the old man, he looked back and started sprinkling corpse-ravaging powder on the corpses. The old man just shook his head. "Ah, what a pity. Recently killed corpses are the freshest." When Su Qing was done, he looked back at the inn and wondered if he should really stay there. Seeing his hesitation, the old man smiled. "I can tell you're new around here. I'm the only place open right now. Everywhere else is closed. It'll cost you 80 spirit coins or 80 merit points. We offer fair prices to all." "Merit points," Su Qing said. He had heard the woman at the teleportation portal check station mention the same thing. The old man grinned. "You really are new here, aren't you? You'll learn more about merit points later. Suffice it to say, they're worth the same as spirit coins." Su Qing frowned. Everything here was so strange. Spirit coins and merit points were worth the same, corpses could be sold, and rooms were expensive. "Don't be stingy now," the old man said with an insincere smile. Nights in this city are anything but peaceful, and all the other inns are closed by now. Plus, I only have 2 rooms left." Su Qing looked up at the sky to determine the time, then turned back to the old man. As he considered what to do, he noticed a shadowy figure suddenly rush toward the inn entrance, trailing blood as he ran. It was a cultivator. Without a word to the old man, he handed over a bag of spirit coins and then disappeared into the inn. "Now I only have 1 room left," the old man said, patting the bag. Su Qing decided to just pay for a room. After handing over the spirit coins, he went inside to a room on the 2nd floor. Before going inside, he looked over the balcony at the old man, who was now smoking a pipe behind the main counter. "What do you buy corpses for?" Su Qing asked. The old man looked up at him and smiled. "I have a pet that loves to eat them. Sadly, you didn't want to sell, but if you have more corpses to sell later on, let me know. I'll give you a good price." With a final look at the old man, Su Qing entered the room. After inspecting everything for safety, he opened the window and looked out into the night. The city was dark, but the moon hung high in the sky, covering the city in a veil of gauzy light. Off in the distance, he heard the cry of the seabirds and the crash of the waves. There were lighthouses casting beams of light out over the water, and he could just barely make out huge ships floating in the port. Seeing all this, he thought back to what the young woman at the teleportation portal had said. Now more than ever, he felt like this city was a deep pool of water filled with hidden dangers. He now knew where the smell of blood came from. In fact, he had just added to it. Actually, other than the nice buildings and clean surroundings, this place wasn't very different from the other places he'd lived. This really is a world of chaos. Right now, his biggest priority was the entry assessment. I shouldn't have trouble passing the assessment, but I should still make sure I'm ready. And I should plan what to do afterward. I still have to worry about Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior. He's the biggest threat to me now. I have to get stronger as fast as possible so that I can kill him. Such thoughts occupied his mind as the night grew deeper. He did not hear the sound of mutant beasts or grooves, but the wind carried with it the faint sound of shouting and raucous laughter, making the darkness seem alive with humanity. Su Qing ignored all that and took out the small cloth bag he'd taken from the Golden Vajra Warrior sect. He had examined it briefly while on the road and had been shocked. The bag seemed small, being only the size of his palm. However, it opened into a different space, which contained enough room to fit a small table. Su Qing had heard of items like this back in the scavenger base camp. They were called bags of holding. Whether in the slums or the base camp, items like this were incredibly rare and valuable. In fact, you couldn't even buy them. Losing this bag of holding was going to be a huge blow to the Golden Vajra Warrior sect. And that wasn't to mention that it contained a medicinal pill bottle. In that bottle were over 30 dust-purging pills. And even more amazing than that, Su Qing found 111 spirit stones. Su Qing had never seen spirit stones before, but one time at dinner, Sergeant Thunder had talked about them. They were rarer than spirit coins, such that 1 spirit stone was worth 1,000 spirit coins. They contained immense spirit power and could even be used for cultivation purposes if necessary. Even 1 spirit stone was incredibly precious. Compared to the bag of holding and the spirit stones, all the other things he took from the Golden Vajra Warrior sect weren't worth mentioning. After examining everything, Su Qing put them in order. One thing was certain: he was rich. From the time he was small until now, he had never possessed such wealth. If I pass the entry assessment, then this should be enough to keep me going in the city for a while and further my cultivation. With that, he closed his eyes to start his daily cultivation routine. Regardless of where he ended up or how the entry assessment went, Su Qing had to keep furthering his cultivation. That was the foundation of everything and the best way to make sure he stayed alive. In the chaotic world he lived in, even things that seemed as certain as the sun rising and setting could change at any time. Anything was possible. The only thing that didn't change was that the weak were the prey of the strong. Furthermore, in Su Qing's experience, the more people there were in a place, the more danger there was. After all, people had treacherous hearts that were often hard to read, and that was truer than ever in this dangerous and mysterious capital city of 7 blood eyes. To Su Qing, this place might as well be a forbidden region. Just a different type than those from before. The night passed. The morning light wasn't as intense as it was during midday, but it still shone aggressively through the window and into Su Qing's room. The sunlight didn't seem to care whether anyone was willing or not. Unless you hid in the shadows, it would find its way down and shine on you. and it was warm enough to wake a sleeping person. Su Qing slowly opened his eyes. He looked at the window, soaked in the sunshine for a bit, and once his blood was pumping, he got up. After doing some stretches to warm up, he opened the door, carefully peered outside, then walked out. The city was completely different during the daytime compared to night. Food carts sold breakfast items, as did many of the shops. People slowly filled the streets, just as detached and in a hurry as the day before. Everyone moved around as if they had a lot of pressure to deal with on a daily basis. Occasionally, he could hear the sound of children reading books in class, echoing out from behind the walls of some of the buildings. That, at least, gave the impression of an ordinary pace of life. As Su Qing walked along, he thought back to one of the medicinal plants Grandmaster Bai had lectured about. It was called a double-life orchid, and it was a strange flower that contained an indivisible symbiosis of light and darkness. Are all big cities like this? Young people were in the crowd, buying food and moving at a faster pace than the adults. Before long, he felt like he was getting used to the environment. After buying a simple breakfast, he started asking around about the entry assessment. Apparently, the city residents were all familiar with the subject. Su Qing quickly learned where to go and found that he needed to arrive by noontime. For the rest of the morning, he spent time familiarizing himself with the layout of the capital city. Given the time constraints, he got a general idea, but the city was too big for him to take in after only a few short hours. The city was probably 10,000 times as large as the scavenger base camp, and what was more, there were areas only 7 Blood Eyes disciples were allowed to enter. Eventually, he checked the time by looking at the sun in the sky, then headed toward the entry assessment. It was located at the southern edge of the city, in the foothills of the Mountains of Truth. Further south from the city were the Sect's 7 mountain peaks. From a distance, it was possible to see paths that wound through the greenery to the top of the peaks. The assessment area was a large square surrounded by a glittering shield of light that only people with identity medallions could pass through. When Su Qing arrived, he saw a few dozen people already present, most of them 17 or 18 years old. Some wore simple clothing, others were dressed in finery. Some were clean from head to toe, others were covered in grime like Su Qing. They were all people with identity medallions who had come from near and far to participate in the assessment. In the middle of the square stood 3 middle-aged cultivators, who emanated spirit power fluctuations, so terrifying that they surpassed Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior. They chatted with each other as they waited for the assessment time to arrive, though they occasionally glanced at the gathering group of new arrivals. Su Qing assessed the scene cautiously. He wasn't someone who liked to socialize, so he found a place off to the side where he could stand alone. There he waited and observed the other people here for the assessment. Most of them seemed to be preparing their cultivation bases. One person stood out to him, a young man in a long blue gown with a fan in his hand. His clothing looked expensive, and he was handsome. Furthermore, his casual, approachable attitude had caused a small crowd to form around him. "I can explain some basics for everybody," he said with a smile. "The capital city of 7 Blood Eyes has 7 districts that correspond to the 7 mountain peaks. Those 7 peaks all specialize in different things and have their own unique aspects. For example, the 7th peak governs the port district and is very powerful. They have unique cultivation techniques, so the disciples from there have astounding battle prowess. They also travel a lot and have a special connection to the Forbidden Sea. The 1st peak is often considered the outward-facing sword of the sect. Their members do a lot of training in Forbidden by the Phoenix and are incomparably grim warrior cultivators. They seldom go out to sea and prefer to live and die in the forbidden regions. Those 2 peaks are the flagships of 7 Blood Eyes, and they recruit a lot of disciples every year. That said, they have very strict requirements. You don't get to pick them, they pick you. Without a special identity medallion, you can't get into them. The other mountain peaks also have identity medallions, but the requirements aren't as strict. Depending on how well you do when you pass the assessment, you might be able to pick one of the peaks, or they might pick you. The 6th peak specializes in equipment forging, the 5th peak in formations, the 4th peak in beast taming, the 3rd peak in magical techniques, and the 2nd peak in the Tao of alchemy. Regardless of which peak you select, you won't have the right to earn profit from 7 Blood Eyes until you're a foundation establishment cultivator. Before then, life is brutal unless you become a conclave disciple. In any case, you'll see what I mean after you pass the assessment. All of the surrounding assessment takers listened to his explanation, including Su Qing. He took special note of the mention of brutality and also profit. He fully understood the meaning of the first term, but when it came to the second, he had questions. However, now wasn't the time to ponder the issue. At the moment, he was trying to decide which peak would be the best fit for him. I'm pretty familiar with forbidden regions, he thought, and that made him wonder if the first peak was the best one for him. That said, he wasn't sure what type of identity medallion he had. As he thought about it, the sound of bells rang out from the 7 peaks. The 3 cultivators in the middle of the square stopped talking and suddenly looked very solemn. The one in the middle glanced at the dozens of assessment takers and then said, "Silence." His voice didn't seem very loud, yet it crashed like thunder in the ears of the gathered crowd. The young man in blue stopped talking, and the other people all stood there looking nervous. Su Qing, meanwhile, had a calm facial expression. "It's time for the assessment," the cultivator continued. "There are 3 phases. If you pass all of them, you'll earn 1,000 merit points. Take first place overall, and you'll receive an additional reward. The first phase of the assessment involves checking your mutagen levels. Before we begin, though, come up one at a time and hand us your identity medallion. State your surname and given name, and don't hide anything from us. If you violate any rules, you'll be punished severely." In response to the instructions, the young man in blue rolled his eyes and walked forward. After handing over his identity medallion, he raised his voice and said, "I'm Zhou Qingpeng. Greetings, seniors." Hearing his loud, clear voice, the 3 middle-aged cultivators nodded in approval. A second person walked up, then another, until 6 had already gone through the line. Finally, Su Qing went up, respectfully handed over his identity medallion, and after a short moment of hesitation said, "I'm Su Qing. Greetings, seniors." It felt strange to Su Qing, as it had been a long time since he told someone his real name. In fact, it was nearly 7 years at this point. Bowing his head, he backed away. The 3 middle-aged cultivators looked over all the identity medallions, but didn't spare any more attention for the assessment takers. With the initial formalities out of the way, the first phase of the assessment began. The first phase was simple. One of the middle-aged cultivators waved his hand, causing a 3-meter-tall bluish stone to appear. It dropped onto the surface of the square with a thump, sending out a cloud of dust in all directions. "Step up in the same order you just presented your identity medallions," he said. "Simply place your hand on the surface of the—" Zhou Qingpeng walked up first. Su Qing watched how he put his hand on the stone, and then noted how it glittered with light as a complex design appeared on its surface. Within that design were more than 40 points of glowing light. 42, said one of the middle-aged cultivators, nodding. "Not bad, you pass." Zhou Qingpeng looked pleased as he backed up to watch everyone else take their turn. As the testing proceeded, Su Qing soon realized what was happening. The higher the number, the more mutagen one had in one's body, and anyone with a number higher than 100 was told they didn't meet the standard. "I bet I don't have any in me," Su Qing thought, his eyes narrowing. Given that this was his first day, he didn't want to make a big scene that made him the center of attention. That just wasn't how he did things. That said, if he didn't do well enough on this assessment, it could affect his future prospects in the sect. So after a while, he glanced down at his shadow and carefully tapped into the mutagen it had stored within it. As he did that, he heard exclamations of surprise around him. 34, outstanding. The middle-aged cultivator sounded shocked at this. Su Qing looked up and saw a young woman about the same age as himself standing in front of the bluish stone. She was dressed similar to him, had a grime-covered face, and seemed to be a scavenger. She looked so nervous she wasn't willing to meet anyone's eyes, but she clasped hands respectfully to the officiating cultivator and hurried back into line. I think her name was Li Zima. Looking away from her, he walked up to the stone and put his hand on it. The light glittered, and the symbol appeared, then glowing dots started to pop up. The middle-aged cultivator glanced at him and nodded. 43, very good, you pass. Su Qing pulled his hand away and walked back in line. Once he released control of his shadow, the mutagen that had seeped into his body was sucked back out again. 43 wasn't amazing, but it was good enough as far as Su Qing was concerned. He was right. Of the over 60 assessment takers, only 19 had a number less than 50, and there were 20 who surpassed 100. Those 20 had somber, ashen faces. The final assessment score is a combination of all 3 phases, said another of the middle-aged cultivators, a man with a long face, a somber air, and a hoarse voice. The next phase tests the strength of your will. Everyone sit down cross-legged. The assessment takers complied, Su Qing included. Looking up at the long-faced cultivator, he tried to guess what a test of will would be like. The long-faced cultivator waved his hand, and a small silver bottle appeared in his fingers, inscribed with numerous magical symbols. It looked ancient, and at the same time gave the sense that it contained something very special. With the bottle out in the open, the other two test officiators stood by somberly. Inside this bottle is a drop of blood that has been diluted countless times over. When the blood is in the open, it will unleash a wave of might. If you can't handle it, bite your tongue to draw blood and give up. With that, he opened the bottle and poured the contents onto the bluish stone. Su Qing looked closely as a drop of viscous, golden liquid emerged. When the golden liquid touched the stone, brilliant light shot up, golden in color, accompanied by a roar that seemed to emanate from ancient times. All of a sudden, the image of an enormous eye appeared. A host of tentacles erupted from the eye, but along with that ghoulish sight came a feeling of utter holiness. It was like the god above gazing down coldly at all living things. The assessment takers sitting there cross-legged felt their minds reel as heavenly lightning was exploding in their head. Then they trembled as if they had lost control of their own bodies and were being ripped out of themselves. They began to shiver in the depths of their souls, while at the same time they felt an instinctual sense of immense fear. Madness rose up in their heart, and many hovered on the verge of losing their minds. Almost instantly, 3 people coughed up blood and collapsed, screaming. Zhou Qingpeng and Li Zimai looked pale in the face and were trembling visibly. They even had blood leaking out of their eyes and noses. Su Qing was unique. Though he was also shaking, he was also profoundly shocked because this eye seemed familiar to him. Back when the eyes of the god above opened, Su Qing had looked up and had felt a sense of might exactly the same as this. One difference was that the god's face had eyes with pupils that resembled crucifixes, while this illusory eye had a vertical pupil. What was more, compared to what he'd felt when the city he lived in was turned into a forbidden region, the current sense of might was like a firefly compared to the sun. It had to be because of how much the drop of blood in the bottle had been diluted. If it had been a pure drop of blood, the mightiness would have been terrifying. But even then, that level of might would have been as different from the open eyes of the god above as heaven was from earth. Regardless, Su Qing was shaken to the core. Only part of that was the physical reaction, though. The rest came from how this event was changing his view of the world. Don't tell me 7 blood eyes has actually extracted blood from the god above. No, that's impossible. The feeling I get is roughly the same, but one is very different from the other. Does that mean that there are other godlike beings alive in this world? That conjecture caused Su Qing to suddenly want to learn much more about the world around him. Rumbling continued and more people coughed up blood. About half of them couldn't hold out and collapsed into unconsciousness, whereupon the long-faced cultivator took them away. Eventually, only 3 other people were left. One of them was Zhou Qingpeng, another was Li Zimai, and third was a young man who, though he wasn't dressed like a scavenger, wore simple clothes that indicated he came from a small city. Finally, that third young man couldn't take it any longer and gave up. Now there were only 3 remaining, including Su Qing. If he wanted to, he could put on an act during this test of will to make himself seem weaker than he was. But in the face of this cold god, he didn't want to. He refused to yield. He stared into the eye, his muscles tensed, his heart pounding, his will pushing against the eye. I survived under the gaze of the broken god face. So how could I possibly yield to a bit of watered-down blood like this? Su Qing's eyes were bloodshot, and he was shaking from head to toe. His blood screamed at him, but after his harsh tempering in the slums and his training in the forbidden region, his will had become strong and he held firm. Eventually, he was the only one left standing, which left the rest of the assessment takers shocked as they watched. Even the long-faced cultivator and his 2 companions were visibly surprised. After all, Su Qing had been holding on for a long time. In the months since this specific assessment had been administered, Su Qing was one of only 3 people who had lasted this long. I wonder if he'll get past the final wave. Nobody has succeeded at that so far this year. As the cultivators shared these words, the melting of the golden liquid passed the halfway point. However, as it was about to fade away completely, the illusory eye twitched and then seemed to stare intently at Su Qing. Terrifying pressure converged on him as though this god demanded that he yield. Mountain-toppling, sea-draining force crushed down on him. He shook, and his head slowly began to bow as though forced by the pressure. Seeing this, the 3 assessment officiators looked surprised and closely observed what was happening. As Su Qing's head bowed, he shook harder and then slowly lifted his chin. Veins bulged on his forehead, but his eyes were as cold and unyielding as those of a wolf. Staring at the illusory eye, he tapped into the 7th level of the sea and mountain incantation, forcing power to erupt from within him and form the spectral hobgoblin. It was many meters tall, with pitch-black skin, twin, spiraling horns, violet eyes, and a gaping red mouth. Glaring at the eye, it unleashed a soundless roar. Roar! Su Qing also roared at the illusory eye. As he did, a tremor passed through him, as though his mind had been struck with a hammer. Blood sprayed out of his mouth, and the hobgoblin disappeared. However, the eye also faded away into nothing. It was over. Su Qing panted for breath, and his head ached, but he struggled to his feet, wiped the blood from his mouth, then clasped hands and bowed to the 3 officiators. Then he walked back into line. The spectators were looking at Su Qing as if he were some sort of freak, and all of them had expressions of utter disbelief on their faces. "Was that a projection of energy and blood?" someone said. "That's what you see at the Great Circle of Body Refinement. It's the same as the Great Circle of Qi Condensation." Numerous gasps could be heard. Su Qing simply stood there with his eyes closed as the pain in his head slowly dissipated. At the same time, he felt stronger than before. It was like when metal was pounded over and over again, turning it into something sharper and stronger. This second phase of the assessment had brought good fortune to Su Qing. He had acquired something as rare as phoenix feathers or killing horns. It was actually a shock to him. He could tell that his perceptions had grown sharper and his will tougher. Of course, the latter was impossible to test out, so he wasn't absolutely sure if he was right. "Excellent," said the long-faced cultivator, looking at Su Qing with an approving nod. "You're Su Qing, right? Since you endured the final wave of might from the second phase, you'll experience an increase in psychic power. Consider the blood of a godly entity as a grindstone that can sharpen your will to incomparable levels." "Godly entity?" Su Qing asked, looking at the long-faced cultivator. The man didn't offer any explanation, but instead looked away and launched into the 3rd phase of assessments. The final officiator was the 3rd cultivator. He had a round face with small eyes that glittered sharply. Walking out in front of his companions, he said, "The 3rd phase is combat, in which you'll fight illusory versions of mutant beasts." The round-faced cultivator pointed at Su Qing. "You, Su Qing, won't need to participate. Evidently, you've practiced body refinement to the point of unleashing a projection of energy and blood. In other words, you have battle prowess equivalent to the Great Circle. There's no point in you participating in the 3rd phase, so you are officially the first person to pass the assessment." The other assessment takers looked at Su Qing enviously, but none of them offered any words of complaint. "Many thanks, Senior," Su Qing said, clasping hands and bowing deeply. He wasn't a big talker, but when he was shown favor, he would respond with courtesy. The 3rd phase began. While the others participated, Su Qing sat down cross-legged to settle his psyche. By the time the 3rd phase was over, he was mostly recovered. Based on what he could sense, it seemed to him like his perception and awareness were twice as good as before. As of now, he could observe things such as the way the breeze stirred the grass. This development caused his heart to beat with excitement. "The grindstone of will worked wonders. Once I'm done here, I need to go test my level of control over my shadow. I bet it's improved." After the 3rd phase of the assessment was over and everyone was back in their original positions, Su Qing stood and joined them. Some distance away, the officiators were making their final. "It's too bad the first peak requires a special identity medallion," Su Qing thought, looking at his own medallion and wondering where he would end up. A moment later, the results were announced. Of the 60 participants, a small group didn't meet the qualifications. They were told that, having failed to become members of 7 Blood Eyes, they had 2 hours to leave the sect. If they stayed longer, the sect's spell formation would automatically kill them. When Su Qing heard that, his pupils constricted. Meanwhile, the people who had failed looked both frightened and dejected. But then another option was presented to them. If they had enough spirit stones to buy merit points, they could stay in the city and live as ordinary citizens. All it cost was 30 merit points per day. The disciples who passed the assessment had to pay the same fee, but they also earned the privilege of being able to buy cultivation resources from the sect. Su Qing was a bit confused by how all this worked, but assumed he would figure it out later. After this, the long-faced cultivator announced the peak assignments. Zhen Han, 1st peak. Zhao Chenggang, 3rd peak. Zhou Qingpeng, 7th peak. There were 5 people assigned to the 1st peak, 3 to the 7th, and the rest of the 5 peaks got about 6 or 7 each. As the man announced the names, Su Qing quietly waited to hear his own assignment. Su Qing, 7th Peak. After announcing Su Qing's assignment, the long-faced cultivator looked at the group of young men and women and said, "Those of you who pass the assessment will be rewarded with 1,000 merit points. As for Su Qing, who took first place, he will receive 10,000 merit points." When Su Qing heard that, he sucked in a breath. Just getting to the 7th peak was a good thing, but getting that much wealth as a reward was quite a shock. Doing some quick mental math, he determined that since merit points were worth the same as spirit coins, his 10,000 merit points were worth 10,000 spirit coins. And if you converted the spirit coins, it meant he had 10 spirit stones. That's so much. The long-faced cultivator produced a jade slip and made some adjustments to it. A moment later, Su Qing felt his identity medallion vibrating. Looking down, he saw the ancient character for 10,000 appear on its surface. However, a moment later, it changed into 9,999. It was missing one. Su Qing's pupils constricted. The other disciples who had passed the assessment also looked at their identity medallion, and many of them looked rueful. A moment later, the long-faced cultivator started taking away the disciples in small groups. Meanwhile, the round-faced cultivator approached Su Qing, glanced at his identity medallion, and then smiled faintly. "Ignore that for the time being. I'll explain everything later." With that, he gathered the other disciples who were now assigned to the 7th peak. Then he led them toward the mountain itself. "Let's go," he said. "I'm going to take you to visit the headquarters of the 7th peak. Cherish this opportunity. It could well be the only time you ever go up the mountain." Deathblade's thoughts. This chapter marks the end of the launch day mass release. I hope you all are enjoying the story up to this point. I would like to thank the team who has been helping out behind the scenes. Hawk9211, Jedrick, Lauren Bucure, Saline Prune, Sarah K., Senior Nepuko, Stompum, the Fiery Moth. And thanks to Unified Divide for proofreading. If you like the translation, please consider leaving a review. They help, and I'll be sure to give you a shout-out. And finally, if you'd like more chapters, you can become a champion and get early access to, as of right now, 6 chapters. I'll be adding more advanced chapters in the coming days. The evening sun cast its light on a small path that ran up the mountain. The sunlight looked like a fine, golden gauze laid over little stone steps and made everything seem holy. Walking up the steps was like walking on sunshine and heading into gloriousness. On either side of the path were leafy, flowering plants. The mountain wind carried the aroma of flowers and soil, which combined with damp sea air to fill a person's heart and mind. There were also many trees, within which echoed the melodious sound of singing birds, as if they had specifically composed music for anyone who walked this path, including the current group of people. There were 5 people, including the round-faced cultivator in the lead, his hands clasped behind his back as he introduced the sect to Su Qing and the others. Since all of you have successfully become members of 7 Blood Eyes, allow me to explain a bit about the sect. Actually, from my perspective, 7 Blood Eyes isn't even a sect. It just calls itself a sect, when in fact, it's a very profitable business. The 4 new disciples were all shocked to hear this. Including Su Qing, the group was made up of Zhou Qingpeng, Li Zimai, and another young woman named Su Ziohui. She wore her hair in a ponytail and had ordinary clothes. Obviously, she wasn't from a rich family, but neither was she a scavenger. She was probably from a small city somewhere. Jade tried to make some conversation with Su Qing, but that wasn't his forte, and besides, he didn't like people getting too close to him, so he just nodded in response to her. Eventually, she'd shifted to trying to cozy up to Zhou Qingpeng. Zhou Qingpeng had a warm, affable smile, quite the opposite of the taciturn Su Qing. Because of that, he and Su Ziohui got along well immediately, and conversed in low tones here and there as they walked along. Li Zimai seemed reserved and cautious, perhaps to the point of feeling inferior, so she brought up the rear and also kept her distance from everyone else. Zhou Qingpeng took the initiative to include both Su Qing and Li Zimai in the conversation and was very friendly with them. As a result, Li Zimai soon warmed up to everyone else. The mountain breeze stirred everyone's hair as they walked along, and the round-faced cultivator continued to introduce the sect. 7 Blood Eyes is divided into 2 parts that we call on-peak and off-peak. They're really 2 completely different worlds. As for you 4, your off-peak disciples, only Foundation establishment cultivators qualify for on-peak life. They also get a split of the profit generated by 7 Blood Eyes. Off-peak disciples live in a world of cruelty and bitterness. they have to struggle to survive. Because of that, off-peak disciples long to eventually be promoted to the on-peak world. Do you know how many people live in the off-peak capital city? The round-faced cultivator looked at the young men and women following him. None of them volunteered an answer. 3 million people, he said, holding up 3 fingers. Most of the population is made up of ordinary citizens, but it also includes the low-ranking disciples from the various peaks. As of now, that includes you. Like everyone else, you need to abide by the rules of 7 blood eyes. Those rules are actually simple. All off-peak people, including common citizens and disciples, have to pay 30 merit points per day to live in the city. 30 spirit coins are also acceptable. They'll be deducted from your identity medallion every day, as you already experienced earlier. If your balance is ever negative, you'll be expelled from 7 blood eyes. That goes for both ordinary citizens and disciples. If you refuse to leave, then within 2 hours you'll be killed by the spell formation. Su Qing looked just as surprised as everyone else to learn this. Even Zhou Qingpeng looked a bit fearful. Of course, that's just the base fee. You have to figure out your own food and lodging. It's survival of the fittest. Things in our capital city are very expensive, and most expensive of all are the cultivation resources. Su Qing didn't say anything in response to this information, and the other 3 new disciples seemed shaken. After a moment, Su Zhaoyue hesitantly asked, "Since that's the case, why do so many ordinary citizens want to live here? 30 spirit coins a day is 1 spirit stone a month. That's too expensive. Furthermore, if we as disciples have to pay the same merit point fee, then what exactly is the benefit of being a disciple?" The round-faced cultivator looked at Su Zhaoyue. "It's not cheap to teleport here. So by default, the people who do come here are skilled and resourceful. They come because they want the best. In the capital city, we keep everyone safe. Disciples are not allowed to wantonly slaughter innocent people, and what's more, the spell formation keeps out mutagen and extends one's lifespan. Compared to life outside, where the mutagen is everywhere, and beasts and outlaws run amok, our capital city is naturally a place most people only dream of coming to. As for the benefit of being a disciple, first, only disciples get access to cultivation resources. Other people aren't allowed to buy them. Furthermore, it's against the rules to resell cultivation resources outside. Do that, and you'll be executed. Second, only disciples who cultivate 7 blood eyes techniques can, after reaching foundation establishment, get the right to live on peak and also get a split of the profits. You 4 need to work hard going forward. By the way, though the sect prohibits disciples from killing each other every month, there are a lot of disciples who mysteriously go missing. The sect basically turns a blind eye to it. They figure it's like putting venomous bugs in a jar and letting them fight it out. Casualties are to be expected. If a foundation establishment cultivator from outside the sect comes to cause problems for our chi condensation disciples, that person will be immediately punished for violating the rules. That said, 7 blood eyes doesn't pay attention to outside chi condensation cultivators. The round-faced cultivator gave them a meaningful smile. Hearing this, Su Qing breathed a sigh of relief, as that was one of the main reasons he'd come to 7 blood eyes. Off to the side, Li Zhaimai hesitantly asked another question. Given all of this, how does the sect create a sense of belonging among the disciples here? What's the unifying force? The round-faced cultivator laughed heartily. Unifying force? What exactly do you mean by unifying force? Friendship is a type of unity, as is gratefulness and reverence, but none of those are very reliable. In the brutal, chaotic world we live in, the only thing that provides a true sense of belonging and the only true unifying force is profit. Only 7 blood eyes disciples can use our techniques to break through to foundation establishment and get the right to be on-peak disciples. Once they do, they get a share of the sect's profits. By the way, 7 blood eyes monthly profit is public information. It comes from residency fees, the sale of cultivation resources, and commerce in the port. Daily income amounts to about 500 million spirit coins. Convert that, and it comes out to 500,000 spirit stones. Do the math, and you can see that the monthly profit comes out to 15 million spirit stones. The profit is split between members based on the level of their cultivation base. Of course, some is withheld for sect expenditures, but the rest is given out to the foundation establishment disciples and any with a higher cultivation base than that. The higher your cultivation base, the bigger the split you get. An early foundation establishment disciple will get about 5,000 spirit stones a month. If you're in gold core, you'll get about 10,000. That's why I said that 7 blood eyes is more like a business. On-peak disciples in the foundation establishment level are like investors in a business. For every day they're around, they earn a day of profit. Now let me ask you, if you had a business out in the world and someone came along and tried to rob you, wouldn't you fight back? The round-faced cultivator's words caused Su Qing's eyes to shine with profound light. At this point, he had a good understanding of how seven blood eyes worked. And maybe it was true that in a chaotic world the only true unifying force was, as this man said, profit. Li Zimai didn't have any further questions. The round-faced cultivator chuckled, then continued to walk, while basically repeating the same general information, that they lived in a chaotic world, and that profit was the only thing that remained constant. At one point, he pointed down the mountain peak. Let me explain a bit about the prosperity of seven blood eyes. See that over there? That's the biggest port in South Phoenix. Ships come and go through it every day. That includes trading vessels from the outside and sect disciples from the seventh peak, heading out to the sea to go on missions. Of course, our peak controls the port. Because of that, ships are very important to the cultivation of seventh peak disciples. We call them Dharma boats. Following the line of the round-faced cultivator's finger, he looked down into the port, which was currently bathed in the evening sunlight. Within the port were numerous horseshoe-shaped harbors, each with a sluice gate and a towering lighthouse. There were over 100 of them, and they were huge, with each one having room for many, many ships. From this distance, Su Qing could see that different harbors were different colors. About half of them were white and were filled mostly with huge trading ships. The other part of the port had violet harbors. From what he could see, the ships in the violet section were small and numerous. The white part is for outsiders, explained the round-faced cultivator. The violet part is where seventh peak disciples live. All of the ships there are the Dharma boats I mentioned. Our Dharma boats are famous throughout South Phoenix. They're like the heart and soul of seventh peak cultivation. Your Dharma boat is essentially your mansion grotto and your mount, all at the same time. More than that, they're like your fighting partner, and also something you absolutely need to acquire the resources you require. You can treat your Dharma boat like a magical treasure. In response to his words, Li Zimai and Su Ziohui's eyes went wide. Obviously, they knew all about magical treasures. Zhou Qingpeng also looked down at the ships below, his eyes shining with anticipation. Su Qing reacted similarly. He knew how rare and expensive magical treasures were. Then he looked down at the densely packed ships in the violet section of the port, and suddenly wondered if calling them rare was accurate. Of course, they're not really magical treasures, the round-faced cultivator continued. But seventh peak Dharma boats can be upgraded. As your cultivation base increases, you can refine them, and eventually, you really could turn yours into a magical treasure. In any case, all new seventh peak disciples long to have a Dharma boat. Unfortunately, even a brand new Dharma boat costs 100,000 merit points, or 100 spirit stones. Furthermore, only disciples with Dharma boats are allowed to work and live in the port. As for disciples who don't have a Dharma boat, they have to earn enough money to buy one. If they can't save up enough to pay for a Dharma boat within 3 years, then they'll have their cultivation base crippled, and they'll be expelled. The reason for this is that the techniques of the seventh peak are all related to the sea and require a Dharma boat to cultivate. They have spirit convergence formations built into them that saves effort and leads to better results in cultivation. Oh, by the way, the techniques are free for disciples. The round-faced cultivator's explanation filled Su Qing not only with the strong desire to get a Dharma boat, but also helped him understand what the seventh peak was all about. Only by focusing on the Dharma boat and the cultivation base can someone on the seventh peak reach foundation establishment. That's the key to survival. I absolutely have to get a Dharma boat. By this point in the introduction, the group was about halfway up the mountain. This was where their identity medallions would be fully activated, and they would get their cultivation technique and Taoist robe. There was only one type of Taoist robe, and it was gray. That was the uniform all off-peak disciples in Seven Blood Eyes wore, regardless of which peak they were from. Activating the identity medallion cost 1,000 merit points. After that, the identity medallion would keep track of a disciple's information, including their merit points. It could also be used for communication. When Su Qing got his Taoist robe, he sensed spirit power fluctuations coming from it, which was when he realized it was definitely an extraordinary item. The fabric was soft but wouldn't wrinkle easily. If a Taoist robe like this were sold outside the sect, it would be very expensive. Li Zimai and Su Qing both seemed equally impressed with the Taoist robe. As for Su Ziohui, she seemed to want to follow Zhou Qingpeng's lead. Zhou Qingpeng looked at the round-faced cultivator and the senior members of the sect distributing the items, and quietly said, "Seniors, I want to buy a Dharma boat." The round-faced cultivator smiled. As for the individual distributing their new items, he was an emaciated old man who looked at Zhou Qingpeng and coolly said, 100,000 merit points, or 100 spirit stones. Li Zimai and Su Ziohui inhaled sharply upon hearing this. To both of them, 100 spirit stones was a level of wealth they could only dream of right now. As for Zhou Qingpeng, he hurried forward and pulled out a golden piece of paper currency, which he offered respectfully with both hands. "A spirit note from the second peak, that'll work." The old man took the note, then handed Zhou Qingpeng a violet brocade box. He looked at the other 3 new disciples. "Anyone else want to buy anything?" Li Zimai and Su Ziohui looked down. As for Su Qing, he thought for a moment, then steeled himself, stepped forward and took 100 spirit stones out of his sack. The old man didn't say anything in particular. As he took out another brocade box, Li Zimai and Su Ziohui looked on enviously. Zhou Qingpeng merely glanced at him out of the corner of his eye. Su Qing took the box and opened it. Inside were 2 items, a jade slip and a transparent bottle. The bottle was unusual. It could fit in his palm and contained a liquid that seemed like it might be seawater. Floating on that water was a small boat with a black canopy. It was completely black and simplistic in its design. However, all of the planks that made up the boat were covered in magical symbols, and despite being inside the boat exuded an extraordinary pressure. In fact, whether it was the bottle itself or the little boat inside, both seemed to be worth a lot more than 100 spirit stones. As for the jade slip, it contained all the information about the boat. "All right," said the round-faced cultivator, "you can head back down the peak now. Remember, neither our techniques nor Dharma boats can be distributed to outsiders. Do that, and the consequences will be severe." Su Ziohui and Li Zimai, "I hope the 2 of you can work hard going forward, and eventually save up enough to get a Dharma boat." Zhou Qingpeng and Su Qing, "Your identity medallions contain all the information about your current assignments. You can see yourselves down the mountain." The 4 new disciples clasped hands to the round-faced cultivator, then turned to leave. However, before Su Qing could even take a step, the round-faced cultivator called out to him, "Su Qing." As the others left, Su Qing turned back around respectfully. "You're strong for a low-level cultivator," the round-faced cultivator continued. "You're obviously in the 7th level of body refinement, yet can produce energy and blood projections like someone in the Great Circle. It's clear you're talented, and are probably toward the top of the pack amongst low-level cultivators. I wouldn't be surprised if you could easily kill rogue cultivators in the 9th or even 10th level. However, body cultivation is simplistic. It gives you speed, strength, and recovery power, but it's not considered a great Tao. To cultivators, the true great Tao is the cultivation of magic. I suggest that, going forward, you focus more on magical cultivation. Your spirit power and magical techniques are too weak. If you encounter rogue cultivators, you'll be fine. But face a disciple from one of the great sects and you'll be in trouble." Hearing this, Su Qing felt shaken. "Furthermore, I'm not sure where you come from, but I bet you lived in constant danger. Because of that, you've developed some instinctual habits." "Habits?" Su Qing asked, not sure what he meant. "Given how well you performed in the assessment, I'm going to give you some advice. When you were walking up the peak just now, you rarely moved your right hand, and your right index and middle finger seemed to be in a constant state of readiness. I'm willing to bet that in your sack, you have some hidden weapons ready to throw out at any time, maybe some needles or flying daggers." Su Qing's expression turned serious. This was the first time someone had ever seen through him so easily. Smiling broadly, the man continued, "I suggest that you don't let this habit become so second nature. If you do, people will notice and you'll end up in trouble. Don't give off clues. Hide your ruthlessness behind a gentle appearance, like a needle concealed in silk." The man's smile didn't seem to contain anything threatening. It seemed like he was doing nothing more than offering a bit of advice to a new disciple. Maybe he even considered it a small investment in the future. But his words caused chills to run down Su Qing's spine. Taking a deep breath, he clasped hands and bowed deeply. As he left, he thought about what he'd just heard and then looked down at his right hand. Flexing his fingers, he tried to make himself look more natural. It took some effort to keep his fingers less rigid, but it started to work. However, if someone looked closely enough, they would see that, within the seemingly natural position of his fingers, was hidden something deeply threatening. He kept practicing as he walked down the mountain. \\\\. Far away from Seven Blood Eyes, in a random scavenger base camp in the wilderness, Master Seventh crouched on a rooftop, looking down at a young man fighting a stray dog. The young man had dog blood all over his mouth and a vicious expression on his face. Master Seventh looked on approvingly. Next to him was his servant, who was currently looking at a jade slip. Master Seventh, the servant said quietly, the kid reached 7 blood eyes. The kid, Master Seventh said, who? The servant smiled wryly. The young man who didn't want to get his new clothes dirty when killing people. You put in a good word for him with Grandmaster Bai, and he started learning the Tao of plants and vegetation. Later, I gave him a white identity medallion. Master Seventh nodded, and as he thought back to Su Qing, his eyes gleamed with approval. I remember now, he was that affectionate and faithful child. Should I take any special measures to watch over him? The servant asked. Master Seventh waved his hand dismissively. There's no need. In this chaotic world, people who want to survive need to rely on their own strength. If he can get by on his own, then when he finally comes to me, I'll reward him with some good fortune. Master Seventh pointed down at the young man fighting the dog. Between this young man and the kid, which do you think more resembles a wolf pup? The servant looked down at the fighting young man and smiled wryly. He had answered questions like this many times on their journey. Since encountering the kid, they had found 9 other children that Master Seventh took a liking to. They're about the same, the servant said. Master Seventh looked over at the servant and laughed. It was a kindness for me to recommend him to Grandmaster Bai and then give him a white identity medallion. But that doesn't mean I've picked him to be my apprentice. I don't owe him anything. I gave him an opportunity, that's all. I really do want a 4th apprentice. But remember, to get my 3rd apprentice, I sent out over 50 white identity medallions. He was the only one who succeeded. You haven't been with me for long, so you're not used to my style. In fact, I have the feeling that giving out 50 medallions won't be enough to find my 4th apprentice. It'll probably take 100. Go give that child down there a white medallion. As before, keep the explanations to a minimum. With that, Master Seventh turned and left. Deathblade's thoughts. This chapter is extra long. Considering this is the first chapter after the initial release, I can't bear to split it in half. However, future chapters that are this long will usually be split in 2, as they take upwards of twice as long for me to translate. The sun sank, and dusk approached. The light shining on the small mountain path gradually grew dimmer. Su Qing had his brocade box slung over his shoulder as he continued to contemplate what the round-faced cultivator had told him. He already felt he understood the basics of 7 blood eyes. The capital city seemed like an orderly place, but was actually filled with hidden dangers. That was especially true at night, when vicious people came out in droves. Some people, in order to improve their chances of survival, were willing to bare their teeth to anyone who got too close. That wasn't the wrong choice to make. Su Qing didn't want to become mincemeat himself, so he decided he needed to find a dark corner somewhere to put the brocade box in his bag of holding without anyone being able to see the bag. He started walking more quickly. Before long, he was at the foot of the mountain, where he saw 2 people in gray Taoist robes. They were none other than Zhou Qingpeng and Su Xiaohui. Su Xiaohui was pretty, and though her gray robe covered most of her figure, it was still possible to see some of her curves. Somehow, the gray robe made her even more alluring. Zhou Qingpeng had been handsome to begin with. With the gray robe, he seemed very elegant, and that made Su Xiaohui even more starry-eyed, although it was hard to say if she was starry-eyed over Zhou Qingpeng or over his Dharma boat. Seeing Su Qing approaching, Zhou Qingpeng laughed heartily and walked over to him. Su Qing, you're finally down. I've been waiting for you. Su Qing's facial expression was the same as ever, but inside, he put his guard up. Instead of walking to meet Zhou Qingpeng, he kept his eyes on the young man's throat and simultaneously shifted his right hand to the opening of his sack so he could pull out his iron skewer if necessary. We're both from the 7th peak now, Zhou Qingpeng said, and we joined the sect together. Since neither of us are very familiar with this place, I was thinking we should stick together as best we can. That way, if either of us run into trouble, we'll already have a friend we can call on. A connection. He seemed very sincere as he then clasped hands to Su Qing. Su Qing relaxed a bit. He had to admit that what Zhou Qingpeng said made sense, so he nodded. Zhou Qingpeng smiled and said a few more things. Seeing that Su Qing wasn't inclined to be talkative, he stepped away to send a voice message with his identity medallion. Then he left with Su Xiaohui. After watching them disappear into the distance, Su Qing looked down at his own identity medallion. It can send voice messages. Examining the medallion curiously, he sent some spirit power into it and instantly saw a host of information. Curious, he walked along while simultaneously continuing to study the medallion. Once back in the city, he found a quiet alley where he put the brocade box in his bag of holding. He didn't change into the Taoist robe, but rather kept on his dirty old jerkin. During the daytime, when the city was neat and orderly, being a scavenger would make him stick out. But at nighttime, it would make it easier to blend in. And he figured it might also help him avoid any bothersome confrontations. After all, scavengers were generally poor, so anyone who targeted him wouldn't be someone strong, and by extension, it meant he could handle them easily. He also spent some time to make sure he knew all the functions of the identity medallion, for instance, how to send messages. His personal information was also stored in the medallion, including his work assignment. I work in the Violent Crimes Division. Although he wasn't sure what that job involved just based on the name, it seemed dangerous. According to the information, he needed to check in for work the next day. The medallion also told him the berth number for his black canopied boat. The sect automatically assigned berths to disciples with Dharma boats and would extract a monthly fee for the spot. It costs 30,000 merit points per month, or 30 spirit stones. If you didn't pay the fee, you lost your spot. Celestial 33, in Harbor 79. Su Qing looked in the direction of the water, then started moving cautiously through the night, doing his best to stay out of sight. Eventually, dusk passed and it was night. Most people in the city had closed and locked their doors for the night. During the day, the city was loud and bustling. Right now, it was very quiet. As Su Qing hurried along cloaked in darkness, he witnessed some of the dangers inherent to night in this city. He saw people being robbed. He saw deadly fighting. He saw people fleeing for their lives. He saw the miserable result when fleeing people ran out of places to run. Hidden in the darkness, he ignored all of that and kept moving, like a specter through the night. Along the way, he spotted some gambling halls and brothels. They were well lit and offered a glimpse into another prosperous side to the city. Perhaps because Su Qing was being so cautious and stealthy, he didn't run into any trouble. But occasionally, he sensed people watching him. The gazes were cold and full of ill intent, but when they noticed he was dressed as a scavenger, most of them just ignored him. He raced through the city for 2 hours until he reached the port district. There were over 100 harbors, and he needed to find number 79 in the violet part. Just as he was about to head out to find his harbor, he shrank back into the darkness of an alley and looked down the street. At first, he could only hear footsteps, but shortly after, a group of cultivators in gray Taoist robes appeared, moving along at top speed. They seemed somber and desolate and radiated cold, sinister auras. Some of them stayed in the middle of the road, others inspected the surrounding buildings. Each of them had a badge on their robe, with the word Violent Crimes inscribed on it in the color of blood. Su Qing observed these seventh peak disciples with narrowed eyes, noting their spirit power fluctuations and baleful aura. Are these Violent Crimes Division constables? They soon reached Su Qing's hiding spot. There were quite a few people in this group, and they were all paying close attention to their surroundings. There was no way he could run away without them noticing. And thus, it didn't take long before a young man with graceful, phoenix-like eyes spotted him and walked toward him. As he neared, his baleful aura reached Su Qing. Su Qing tensed at the sense of incredible danger. Even before the young man was close, his mere presence turned everything in the alley as cold as ice. Only someone who had done a lot of killing would have a baleful aura like this. Su Qing knew that if he bolted, the young man would definitely attack him. Therefore, he stood in place unmoving, though he did put his hand close to the black iron skewer. Identity medallion, the young man said, looking Su Qing up and down. His gaze lingered on Su Qing's right hand. A few other disciples approached, surrounding Su Qing. They all had icy expressions. It was obvious that if he did anything wrong, they would attack him instantly. Noticing that they were looking at his right hand, he told himself that he really did need to work on his habits. Looking around, he carefully got his identity medallion out and handed it over. The young man looked at it and his cold expression softened. Sounding surprised, he said, "Guess what, boys? He's a new recruit from the 7th Peak, also assigned to the Violent Crimes Division. All right, calm down, everyone. You're going to scare our young friend to death before he even reports in for duty." Most of the auras shrank back. although a few of the surrounding constables still kept their eyes on Su Qing. So they really are from the Violent Crimes Division. Su Qing sensed the energy fluctuations that had been locked onto him fade away. However, the young man with the phoenix-like eyes continued to examine him as he returned his identity medallion. "You're a funny one, young friend. Get going. This place isn't safe at night." Su Qing nodded, took his identity medallion, and was about to walk off when a piercing, blood-curdling scream rang out from a short distance away. Su Qing turned to look in that direction, his expression serious. Off in the distance, near a tall building, a shadowy figure stumbled out onto the air itself, coughing blood. This person's spirit power fluctuations were in chaos, but they were obviously in the Foundation establishment level. Pursuing him was a middle-aged man in a violet Taoist robe, his expression threatening without being angry, and his spirit power fluctuations so intense that they were like a raging fire compared to the other man. Whistling through the air toward the first man, the fellow in the violet robe produced a long spear that he thrust forward viciously. The air itself seemed to split, and a shockwave rolled out in all directions. Meanwhile, the spear erupted into flames, which formed a fire dragon that shot toward the fleeing, shadowy figure. It was a dazzling sight. The fire dragon moved with incredible speed, causing a piercing sound to ring out. When it hit the shadowy figure's torso, it pierced through him with a thump, then continued onward to slam into the street below. As it did, it sent a blast of wind in all directions. The shadowy figure had been killed with ruthless efficiency. Su Qing was shaken by the scene. From what he could sense, the shadowy figure that had just been killed was probably on the same level as Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior. His spear had been incomparably strong. Su Qing knew that if he had to fight someone like that, he would surely be killed. The surrounding constables from the Violent Crimes Division looked very excited. "It's the division director. Let's go." Ignoring Su Qing, they raced over to the scene of the fight. Even after they were gone, Su Qing still felt his mind reeling from watching that spear attack. Then he took a deep breath, and his eyes shone with anticipation. "I wonder when I'll be able to do something like that." With one last glance in the direction the violet-robed man had disappeared to, Su Qing turned and walked away. Sensing that it wasn't a calm night, he hurried on his way. It took about an hour for him to find the horseshoe-shaped Harbor 79. The port district was different from the city proper. It was very dark, and though there were patrolling guards, they seemed unusually vigilant. Furthermore, they avoided anyone they saw. Clearly, their vigilance came because they were worried about getting hurt. They avoided Su Qing as well. Seeing this, Su Qing's understanding of the level of danger in Seven Blood Eyes increased. Nearing his assigned harbor, Su Qing felt the humidity in the sea breeze and could see the lapping waves. There were other boats docked there, but they maintained distance from each other. Most were roughly the same size, although there were a variety of designs. However, examining them closely for a moment, Su Qing realized that most of them resembled his own black canopied boat. There were over 200 of them. That said, Harbor 79 was so big that the current set of boats docked there only took up about 20% of the entire available space. Some of the boats had lamps burning, but most were still and silent. He didn't see any disciples around. Apparently, everyone put their guard up when night fell. Su Qing sensed that the spirit power was strong here, but so was the mutagen. Apparently, it came in from the sea. The water was so dark that it was impossible to see the seafloor. That alone would make people uneasy. Who could possibly tell what dangers lurked down there? Glancing at the water, Su Qing felt his hair standing on end, the same as it often had back in the forbidden regions. Practicing cultivation here will lead to fast progress. Every moment of cultivation is like working on a grindstone. With that, he hurried toward Celestial 33. It was an out-of-the-way spot, without many other boats nearby. After arriving, Su Qing looked around the area, and after making sure he was alone, took out the brocade box, then the bottle. When he opened it, the little boat inside flew out to rest on the water. There was a loud thump, and then water rippled as the boat expanded until it was 9 meters long. It was pitch black, its planks covered with magical symbols that emanated a black glow, as well as extraordinary spirit power fluctuations. The black canopy seemed to be made of the hide of some sort of mutant beast. The scales on the hide were clearly visible. It seemed very sturdy. There was a figurehead on the prow of the boat, depicting a large crocodile head, its gaping mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. It looked vicious and radiated an air of brutality. From a distance, his little boat actually looked like a crocodile floating on the water.